The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I sat in our dark bedroom, the computer screen glaring with a harsh, white light. A banner flashed before my eyes. Seek wisdom by understanding yourself. Chloe, check this out. I called over my shoulder to my girlfriend playing The Sims on her laptop. She glanced up, her brow furrowing in confusion before giving me a bemused look. "What the hell are you looking at?" she asked. "It's some cult," I replied. Unable to hide my fascination, I fell down a rabbit hole and found this local place downtown. It's a derivative of Aleister Crowley and Golden Dawn bullshit. I pointed to the Google Street View image of a dilapidated storefront in an ethnic shopping center. She smirked, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I never pegged you as the religious type." "Check this out," I continued, clicking through the site. "They have some photos." We spent some time going through the albums celebrating various solstices. Most were taken in an odd room with black and white checkered floors, adorned with Egyptian pseudo-artifacts, bathed in the glow of red and purple lights that transformed the scene into a surreal dreamscape. The people certainly had an alternative vibe. Tattoos were plentiful, but other than that, they looked like they came from all different walks of life. Many of them looked like they had their fair share of bullying in high school, no shortage of that. But most of them looked relatively normal aside from the occasional piercing. One photograph in particular caught my eye. A woman sitting in a bright red room, Saturday on an altar, holding a staff in her right hand, wearing nothing. A man was kneeled before her, his arms tied behind him, rope anchored to the ceiling. They were sliding a knife down his back, a small trickle of blood dripping to the floor. "Damn," Chloe started. "She's butt-ass naked." "You want to go?" I asked. "They're having a get-together tonight." "You know what? Fuck it. Why not? It's not like we're doing anything," she replied. "Good." I smiled, standing up, because I already ordered an Uber. She sighed before opening a drawer and pulling out a small pipe. "I'll go, but I'm not going sober." It was a cold, shitty Seattle winter night. We got dropped off in the parking lot and spent a few minutes looking for the storefront. We finally found it next to a dog groomer and faux restaurant with some pun for the name I can't seem to remember. We entered the shop, which consisted of two narrow aisles separated by wood shelves barely big enough for me to fit down. We spent some time looking at the various items, my attention diverting to a vial of elk blood. I remember wondering if they were even allowed to sell this without some type of medical certification. They definitely did not have, while Chloe shuffled through a bowl of mix and match crystals. "Can I help you?" I heard a woman say from the back as she emerged from a beaded curtain. She was a short, overweight woman wearing what I could only describe as a sports bra and hula skirt. "Hi, I stuttered. "I'm George and this is Chloe. We're here for the winter solstice celebration." "Oh, goody. Newcomers," she said with an out-of-place, overjoyed expression as she clapped her hands. Chloe and I laughed nervously. "The door is in the back, but you can come through here just this time," she said with a smile, arm holding the beaded curtain open. We walked through a dark hallway, somehow more cramped than the shop, into a rather large room. A gaggle of people were huddled in the back, which Chloe and I quietly shuffled into. A bearded man paraded around the room, white robes and red headdress cascading into a cloak, knuckles adorned with several large rings gripping a spear, held vertically in front of him. Behind him, another bald man, white robes and yellow cloak, followed behind. white sleeves crossed over his chest. I glanced at Chloe's bloodshot eyes, THC clearly flowing through her system. I gave her a knowing look, as if to say, having fun yet? She returned a slow smile. Without warning, the entire crowd clapped their hands together over their heads as a woman in blue robes walked past, waving a censer leaking white smoke. We awkwardly followed to match the group. The blue curtains on the back wall opened to reveal an older Asian woman sitting perched on the altar I saw in the photos. Again, completely naked. And before you ask, no, she wasn't attractive. It's never the ones you hope it is. The red-robed man kneeled down and softly kissed her knees. I glanced back at Chloe. Her smile was so big, I was afraid she was going to laugh at any moment. I pinched her on the side and whispered into her ear, do not fucking laugh. Honestly, I think I just made it worse. Her face turned beet red as she bit her cheeks. The ritual went on for another half hour or so. They must have said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, at least a dozen times. We were getting kind of bored and were ready to leave before the woman in the blue robes wandered in with a caged chicken. No fucking way, I thought. Surely enough, the man in the yellow robes held the chicken high in the air before slitting its throat and draining blood into a large metallic basin. The man winced as the chicken flailed violently, scratching up his arms, before eventually succumbing to blood loss. One by one, each person there stood between a white and black pillar, saying love and intention in Greek before eating a piece of something, taking a sip of blood, and saying, there is no part of me that is not of the gods. Chloe and I hung back and politely declined when our turn came. Once all was said and done, they busted out some alcohol and started celebrating. We slipped out into the street, bursting out laughing. After we finally collected ourselves, Chloe whipped out her phone and showed me she took dozens of pictures of the ritual. We laughed our asses off the entire way home. First thing she did was open her laptop and post the pictures on Twitter, tagging the lodge with the caption, "Me and the boys chilling right now." We returned to the usual rhythm of our lives. I went to work, conducting meetings and answering emails, while Chloe went back to her classes. A few days later, Chloe checked her Twitter and saw that she had gained a few thousand likes. The whole ordeal became a running joke between us. I would eat fruit snacks and sip on my soda, saying, there is no part of me that is not of the gods. A few weeks later, we had mostly forgotten about it, except for the occasional recounting as a funny story to regale our friends. One night, while Chloe and I were spending our evening the usual way with me on the computer and her on her laptop, I felt her furiously tap my shoulder while staring wide-eyed at the window. Confused, I took my headphones off and walked over, pulling back the curtain to reveal 6 people standing in black robes and animal masks watching us from the hillside. What do we do? Should I call the cops? Chloe whimpered. No, they're just a bunch of larpers. They're not going to do shit, just trying to scare us, I said angrily as I closed the blinds and hopped back on my computer. Chloe sat there for a few minutes in a tense pose with her arms folded together. She went to double-check the door was locked before we continued our night as normal. The next day I got a text from Chloe frantically telling me to come home immediately. When I arrived, there was a squad car parked outside our building. I ran up the stairs to see 2 officers standing by Chloe in the doorway. I nearly shouted, asking what was going on. They lead me inside to show me a massive black symbol drawn on our wall, a 6-pointed star made from one continuous line. We finished our police report and they told us they'd get back to us if they find anything. I've been robbed often enough to know that means they're going to forget about this before they've even gotten back into their squad car. Furious, I stormed over to the shop and banged on the window. The hula skirt woman came over and cracked the door open just enough for me to see one of her eyes. What the fuck do you think your little posse is doing? I screamed at her. Breaking into my apartment like that? You all are fucking psychos! I haven't any idea what you're talking about, she said with a sly grin. Oh, yeah, I said, pointing a finger in her face. If anyone tries any shit like that again, I'm going to burn your goddamn shop to the ground. Do you hear me? She looked at the ground, clearly nervous. I have never blown up at a stranger like this, but I could tell my threats were working. After a moment of silence, I stormed off again, back towards home. "You meddle with forces you do not understand," she called out from the shop. I picked up a glass bottle from the sidewalk and chucked it, smashing against her shop window, forcing her to close the door and disappear into the shadows. I'm not particularly proud of how I behaved in this moment, but unless you've had someone break into your home and draw shit on the walls, hold on to your judgment. The next few days passed without so much as a peep from them. Chloe and I began to relax, convincing ourselves that the cult had been scared off. Life seemed to be returning to normal, and the unsettling incident became just another story. One afternoon at work, my phone buzzed. It was unusual for Chloe to call during her classes, so I quickly picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then, a faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against the phone, followed by a sharp click. "Chloe?" I asked. No response. I called back, but it went straight to voicemail. Something felt wrong. I texted her, "Hey, just got a call from you. Everything okay?" Minutes turned into hours with no reply. She never ignored my messages. My discomfort grew with every passing minute. As the workday neared its end, I couldn't focus anymore. I told my boss there was an emergency and rushed out. As I pulled into our apartment complex, my heart sank at the sight of Chloe's bag on the ground, its contents strewn everywhere. Panic surged through me as I slammed the car door and rushed over. I screamed her name, hoping she was nearby. All down the sidewalk was her makeup, wallet, keys, and phone. With trembling hands, I quickly dialed 911. My voice was shaking as I explained the situation. The dispatcher, in a dismissive tone, asked if she might be with family or friends. Seemingly unconvinced, I felt like crying. My whole world has been stolen from me, and my only lifeline is being less than useless. After several minutes of arguing and clarification, she finally let me know a car was on the way before I hung up on her mid-sentence. With tears now running down my face, I slowly collected her belongings and put them back into her bag. Every item gave me visions of her. The concealer she put on in the morning, the hairbrush she always used in the car, the lavender essential oil she put on her pillow. I sat on the grass in a stupor for I don't know how long before I looked up to see two cops wander over to me. I explained everything. The shop, the cult, the symbols for which I still had an open police report. "Is this some kind of joke?" one asked. "No," I said as I looked up at him confused. "Why would this be a joke? She's missing. She's probably scared right now. Why won't you do anything?" "Look," one of them sighed. "We get calls like this a lot. She's not a minor, and she hasn't been gone that long. She might just be staying with a friend. If she doesn't show up in the next few days, give us a call and we'll take a look. Until then, just sit tight." I didn't respond. I just stared at the blades of grass, even as they got back in their car and drove off. I was completely and totally broken. These freaks clearly wanted us dead for mocking them, and they had the numbers to make that happen. I pulled out my phone and looked at the post with the photos Chloe had taken of the ritual. Desperate for someone to take this seriously, I started recording a video. With puffy red eyes and a shaky voice, I let it all out. I don't remember everything I said or the order I said it in, but by the end, the video was 17 minutes and 36 seconds long. I hit reply and sat on the grass until nightfall. I moved through the next day like a ghost. I didn't even bother calling out sick to work. That afternoon, I heard a knock on the door, expecting it to be my landlord bitching about our trash cans again. I opened it to find a different face greeting me, one I never wanted to see for the rest of my life. Two massive hands slammed into my chest, sending me tumbling over a bar stool. A large man with a shaved head, wearing a wife-beater and gold chain, walked in. Tim, more commonly known as Little Timmy, was anything but. Last time I heard of him, he was stealing cars from dealerships and using them to run guns down to Mexico. Given that he was now in my apartment, I'm guessing most of the felonies he was charged with didn't stick. "Where the hell is my sister?" Little man, he said as he loomed over me. I don't know. Someone took her, I said with a cough. How did you even find out? Well, no thanks to you, asshole. Not even a call to her family. He punched me in the gut. I was in a lot of pain, but I had to admit he was right. I should have told them, but I think I was in too much of a stupor to even think straight. You were supposed to be keeping her safe, he said as he kneeled down and grabbed me by the collar. I knew you were always a sniveling little shit, but she gets got and I have to find out like this, he said as he held up his phone with the video of me crying on the grass yesterday. I was confused. How did you see that? She's my sister. Dumbass. How do you think? Shit's blowing up right now. Do you not check your phone? He spat as he walked over me, further into the apartment. I snatched my phone off the counter. Notifications flooded the screen in a blur. I clicked one to see my post was now at 27,000 likes, with nearly 5,000 retweets. It had gone viral. I got a meeting with my parole officer down south in 3 days. Tim started, but I'm not leaving until I know she's safe. So either we find her, or I'm going back to jail, and that shit's gonna be on you, little man. You don't want to know what happened to the last guy that got me locked up. Right. Okay, I stuttered. I scrolled through the replies. There was everything from reaction gifs to condolences to people accusing me of killing her. But one in particular caught my eye. Hey George, I'm Kelly with GSNN. Would you be available to meet for an interview? I stopped for a moment. Everything was happening so fast. I went from feeling helpless to feeling like the whole world was on my side. At that moment, I knew I had to man up. I was going to save her. Tim, there's a woman at the shop that knows more than is letting on. Can you talk to her? A journalist wants to meet, and I'm going to try to see her tonight. Tim walked over. I flinched as he put a hand on my shoulder. Sure. Kid, I'll go talk to her. Just give me the address. I replied to Kelly, arranging to meet at a cafe near the station at 7 p.m. She agreed without hesitation, since we lived downtown. The station was only a few blocks away, so I decided to walk instead of taking an Uber. The air was cool and crisp as I stepped onto the sidewalk. It was Friday night, and the city buzzed with life. Tourists filtered in and out of restaurants and bars, ready to start their wild nights. The sense of street food mingled with the distant hum of live music created a vibrant collage of city life. The crowds near the public market seemed thicker than usual. Groups of rowdy adults streamed out of the parking structures, their laughter and chatter echoing off the buildings as they made their way to a concert at the showbox. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting colorful reflections on the wet pavement, remnants of an earlier drizzle. Lost in thought about what I was going to say in the interview, I almost missed a fleeting image in my peripheral vision. I could have sworn I saw a large, overweight man standing on the street corner, cloaked in a grey hoodie and wearing a rabbit mask. I snapped my head towards the figure, only to see an older Asian man holding a shopping bag, his eyes focused on his phone through his glasses. I shook my head, trying to clear the unsettling image from my mind. The streets seemed more crowded than usual, with groups of people milling about, their faces blending into the city's evening blur. Then I saw another one, this time. It was a slender figure in a fox mask, standing at the entrance of an alleyway, the mask's painted eyes seemingly fixed on me. Unlike before, this figure didn't disappear. It remained, an unnerving presence that tracked my every move as I passed. I quickened my pace, trying to rationalize the sightings. Maybe it was a promotional stunt or some kind of performance art. But the more I walked, the more these figures appeared. A tall man in a wolf mask loitered near a bus stop, his masked face turned towards me. A child in a bear mask peeked out from behind a parked car, their eyes following me intently. They stood still, their masks fixed in my direction, blending into the crowd, yet distinct in their silent, unnerving presence. The crowd thickened as I approached the market area. The festive atmosphere felt increasingly oppressive. The laughter and chatter of the crowd, a dissonant background to my rising panic. I weaved through the throng, my eyes darting around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. No one else seemed to notice them. A group of teenagers walked right past a person in a bird mask without even a second glance. A couple chatted happily, oblivious to the figure in a deer mask standing right behind them. It was as if I was the only one who could see these eerie figures. That's when it happened. A sharp, searing pain tore through my side. An icy chill spread through my body, causing me to stiffen. The sounds of the night faded into a muffled drone, and my vision narrowed and sharpened. Instinctively, my hand flew to my side. My fingers met something warm and wet. I pulled my hand away and stared at the blood slicking my skin. It was only then that the reality hit me. I had been stabbed. I stumbled, my back colliding with a cold stone wall. My legs felt like jelly, barely able to support my weight. A woman next to me screamed, her eyes wide with horror as she backed away. I tried to focus on her face, but everything blurred together, the world tilting and spinning around me. Another man rushed over, supporting my neck as I slumped to the ground. He muttered something in a reassuring tone, but his voice seemed distant. My vision started to fade as he reached down to my side. With a firm but careful grip, he pulled out a long, wavy-bladed dagger. The blade was intricately patterned, each curve shimmering under the streetlights, with an ornately decorated hilt. The pain intensified for a moment, then dulled as a numbing cold spread through my body. I could hear distant sirens, growing louder as they approached. The man kept talking, trying to keep me conscious. I blinked slowly, fighting to stay awake, the world around me dimming. The next thing I knew, paramedics were by my side, their voices urgent. They worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound and asking me questions to keep me alert. The stretcher felt hard as the bright lights of the ambulance interior blinded me. The first thing that pierced the black veil of unconsciousness was the sharp, unyielding pain in my side, followed by the distant ringing of a phone at the night shift nurse's desk. I turned my head slowly, each movement sending waves of agony through my body, and saw a doctor reading from a manila folder. "Oh, you're awake," he said with surprise, noticing my movement. "I was wondering when you'd come around. That knife did quite a bit of damage." His name tag read Dr. Wilcox. I tried to shift myself, only to feel the restraints binding my wrists to the bed. A small panic welled within me as I tugged against them, the leather straps digging into my skin. "Quite a lot of alkaloids in your blood and urine as well," the doctor continued in a detached tone. "Some type of poison. I'm surprised your heart didn't give out. The surgeon's decision to administer antiarrhythmics might have saved your life." I glanced around the room, trying to get my bearings. The faint glow of the moon filtered through the large window, casting shadows over the murky waters of the Puget Sound. "Why am I in restraints?" I asked. "That's for your own protection." He smiled. "Didn't want you wriggling away with all those stitches. Almost 200 in total, most on the inside. Just barely missed the abdominal aorta. That one isn't so easy to stitch up." "Well, can you take them off? They're hurting," I asked with an irritated tone. "No, I don't think so." He shook his head. "Besides, now that you're awake, we need to move you to a more accelerated treatment program." With that, he pressed a button on the wall, and 2 orderlies entered the room, wheeling a heavy-duty medical chair. "Strap him in," the doctor ordered. The orderlies moved quickly, roughly unstrapping my wrists from the bed and yanking me up. I winced as pain shot through my side, but they ignored my protests. As they lifted me, I felt a sharp, tearing sensation. I looked down and saw a small pool of blood seeping through the bandages. Wait, I think one of my stitches ripped," I said, my voice trembling from pain. The doctor glanced at the blood, his expression unchanged. "It's nothing to worry about," he said dismissively, before turning to one of the orderlies. "Take him to the basement. Oh, and be sure to use the service elevator." "Wait, what? Why?" I said, turning my head desperately. "Why are you taking me to the basement?" "Do not worry, Mr. Morrison," he said as he approached with a syringe in hand. Grabbing my arm, He quickly inserted the needle and injected me with a milky white substance. "This will help you relax." Almost immediately, a heavy drowsiness began to wash over me. The sounds around me started to blur. My limbs felt heavy, and my eyelids drooped despite my efforts to stay alert. The lights of the ceiling passed over me in a blur, like headlights from cars on a rainy night. The walls appeared in sickly shades of green and yellow, the scent of cheap antiseptic failing to mask the odors of death and decay. Sweat pooled on my skin as my neck rolled uncontrollably, my eyes struggling to focus on any object whirling by. At the end of the hallway, I saw the doors to the service elevator, a double-wide metal contraption mottled with splotches of rust. It approached slower than our pace should have allowed, and I distinctly remember the sensation as if I were being fed into the mouth of some great beast. As we accelerated down the hallway, a nurse appeared from around the corner, standing directly in our path. The wheelchair screeched to a halt, and I would have fallen to the floor if not for the straps anchoring me down. Their conversation was mostly muffled as I tried to steady my head enough to look directly at the woman arguing with the orderlies. After a tense moment, the two orderlies reluctantly walked away as she took control of the chair and turned down another hallway. Away from the elevator, leaning down, her breath cool on my ear, she whispered, "We are in more danger than you could possibly imagine." We abruptly stopped again before she wheeled me backwards into a small room. "We need to get you changed," she said as she grabbed some scrubs from off a shelf and began undressing me. "Can you stand?" I felt drool dribble down my chin as I asked who she was. "Kelly, from GSNN. I don't have time to explain right now. I just need to know if you can walk." I tried to say no, but only managed to blow a spit bubble out of my foaming mouth. "Shit." "Okay," she replied as she finished dressing me. "Put your arm over me," she said as she hoisted me out of my chair. We re-entered the hallway, thankfully empty, the silence amplifying my ragged breaths. Each step was a monumental effort, my focus narrowing to the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other as Kelly supported my weight. Somehow, we reached the elevators. Kelly pressed the button, her eyes darting around nervously. Footsteps echoed up the hallway, growing louder. She quickly turned me to face away just as two doctors strolled past, too engrossed in argument for them to notice us. The elevator dinged and opened. Two male nurses inside stopped mid-conversation to stare at us. Kelly gave a meek smile as she half-carried, half-dragged me into the elevator, leaning me against the corner. The nurses continued to stare, suspicion flickering in their eyes. Kelly managed a small, strained smile, tried to pull a 48-hour shift. I told him he couldn't do it. The nurses chuckled, one patting my shoulder. "You doing all right, buddy?" I summoned every ounce of strength to speak clearly. "Never better, can't you tell?" They laughed again. "You'll be all right. Hang in there." The elevator doors opened to the chaotic lobby, the noise hitting us like a wave. The tension in my chest eased slightly as we were momentarily swallowed by the crowd. Some clearly homeless individuals huddled in corners, seeking warmth from the cold outside. A woman stood nearby, arguing loudly with a doctor, her voice sharp and desperate. Families milled about, their faces etched with worry, while children with broken arms and bandaged heads clung to their parents. Kelly hoisted me up again, the strain evident in her muscles. She guided me to a chair amidst the chaos, her eyes darting around, taking in every detail. At the center of the lobby sat a security desk with two guards, their eyes intermittently scanning the area, looking bored and indifferent to the surrounding commotion. Kelly quickly made a call on her cell phone. "Front entrance, now." As she spoke, her gaze never stopped moving, constantly on alert for any sign of danger. The lobby's frenetic energy surrounded us, but for a moment, we were just another part of the hospital's endless flow of people. "Hey, you two, we need all hands in the ER. Stud," a nurse called out, rushing past with a face flushed with urgency. "We've got 2 GSWs coming in and we're short-handed. Trauma bays are filling up fast." "Ugh." "Sorry, can't," Kelly shot back. The nurse stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean, can't? Kelly hesitated for a moment. Dr. Wilcox, she said, told us to stay on standby for a special case. The nurse frowned. Dr. Wilcox, he's in the recovery room. You know, we need everyone in the ER right now. She paused. Where are your ID badges? Kelly's hand instinctively moved to her chest. We must have left them in the break room. We were in a rush. The nurse's gaze became more intense. Both of you forgot them in the break room. Why were they even off in the first place? Wait here, she said, turning towards the security desk. Shit, get up. Kelly hissed into my ear as she put my arm back over her shoulder, beelining towards the entrance. I looked over to see the nurse talking to the security guard at the desk and pointing directly at us. The doors opened as a black CRV pulled up. Kelly threw me into the back and ran around to the passenger's seat. Slamming the door, the security guards rushed in front of our car, drawing their weapons and assuming a firing stance. The wheels screeched on the pavement as the driver gunned it, hitting one of the guards and sending him tumbling onto the sidewalk. You okay, little man? I heard a familiar voice say. I looked up to see Tim driving. He'll be all right, I think, Kelly replied. After you didn't show, I knew something was wrong, Kelly said softly, taking a sip of her coffee. Thankfully, your brother-in-law reached out. I had some trouble finding you, especially since you were checked into the hospital as a John Doe. I still felt groggy, but the coffee helped. I Saturday on my worn, comfortable sofa, while Kelly perched at the dining table and Tim stood gazing out the window. The woman at the shop helped us find you. She broke pretty easily, Tim said without turning around. Didn't know anything about Chloe, though. Did you figure out why they were so angry with us? I asked. She messed up. The event was members only. She let you slip in through the shop, he replied. I absorbed the information, then turned to Kelly. So, why are you helping us? Thank you for saving my life, but what's in it for you? I've been working on this story for almost 2 years, Kelly said. Every time I tried to publish, it got kicked back. Editor said it wasn't newsworthy. I knew if I had proof of an abduction, I'd have my story. So you know everything about them? I asked, feeling a flicker of excitement. Pretty much, Kelly replied. For most of their history, they were eccentric, but harmless. That changed a decade ago when Marcus Voss took over. Kelly paused, sipping her coffee. She took a deep breath and continued. Voss was a prominent figure in the Order of the Nine Angles, or owner. These guys are the real deal when it comes to depravity. Murder, torture, ritualistic abuse. Anything you can think of, they've done it. The hysteria from the 1980s satanic panic might have been overblown, but with Voss and the owner, those fears were justified. Voss isn't known for making friends. He alienated almost every other senior member until he was eventually exiled. That's when he found the Ordo Arcana Eternum, or OAA for short. That's our guys. Voss climbed the ranks of the OAA quickly. When the former leader, the Magister Magnus, vanished, Voss seized control. He replaced senior members with his loyalists and sycophants while using manipulative recruitment tactics, targeting the vulnerable, isolating them from their families, and love bombing. Last I checked, he got their numbers up in the hundreds. Kelly's expression darkened, but that was just the beginning. Voss then turned to drugs, both using and selling. He transformed the group from eccentric spiritual seekers into a mix of addicts and hardened criminals. Under his leadership, they became dangerous, an army of brainwashed followers willing to do anything for him. Tim finally spoke up. Thanks for the history lesson, but how does this help us find Chloe? Kelly Saturday quietly for a moment. I think they're escalating towards something big. We need to go to the cops, I said, feeling a surge of urgency. With everything you've told us, they have to take this seriously. Kelly shook her head, her expression grim. It's not that simple. George, the police won't be of much help here. Why not? I demanded. They need to know what's going on. Kelly sighed, setting her coffee cup down. Believe me, I've tried. They see this as just another conspiracy theory. The OAA has deep pockets and connections in high places. They've paid off or intimidated anyone who gets too close. To them, it's just another fringe group, not worth their time. They won't act unless they have undeniable proof. And by then, it might be too late. Tim nodded. She's right. These guys play dirty. If we go to the cops now, they'll just tip off Voss. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. All right, so what's our next move? Next move is to find Voss. No more bullshit, Tim said. I've already missed my parole meeting, so I really don't have much time. Kelly has his address. So what? We all just break into his place and interrogate him? I asked. Oh, no, I'm not coming. Kelly objected. This is all on you. I'm pretty much an accessory already, but I'm not going to get involved in breaking and entering. Looks like it's just us. Little man, Tim said, punching my shoulder. Get some sleep. We've got a big night. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, the loose-fitting blue polo clinging to my sweat-dampened skin as I adjusted the collar for the 100th time. Tim straightened the emergency medical badge on his chest as he wiped down the dashboard with a dirty rag. This isn't going to work, I muttered. Can you stop being a bitch? For like 5 minutes? Please, Tim snapped. I've been doing this gig for 6 months. Most security booths just buzz me right through. We'll be fine. I didn't respond. Instead, I gazed out the window, watching as the city lights of Seattle dwindled behind us, swallowed by the darkness as we ascended the winding switchbacks into the hills. The view was almost beautiful enough to distract me from the weight of what we were about to do. Each turn of the road felt like a step closer to our doom. We turned onto an immaculately manicured path, the large wrought iron gates looming ahead, framed by imposing stone walls. The black veil of night surrounded us, leaving only our headlights, the guard booth, and the soft glimmer of the mansions lining the hillsides. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw an old man in the booth straighten up, set aside whatever he was eating, and approach the window. Tim waved and pointed to the logo on his shirt, Imperial Medical Services. He slowed the car to a crawl, his confidence seeming unshakable. The old man stood at the window watching us as Tim slowly rolled by, expecting the gate to open. Instead, the guard held his hand up, signaling us to stop. Fuck, Tim whispered under his breath, his facade cracking ever so slightly. The guard motioned to roll down the window. Evening. Gentlemen, delivery slip and IDs, please. Sure. 1 second, Tim said, his voice unnaturally calm. He reached into the glove box, and I caught a glimpse of IDs from at least 4 different states, all with different names but each featuring Tim's face. He picked one and handed it over along with the papers. And your friend there? The guard asked, his gaze shifting to me. He's undocumented, doesn't have ID, Tim replied smoothly. Right, 1 minute, the guard said as he stepped back into the booth. The minutes stretched agonizingly as he examined the ID and spoke on the phone, casting occasional glances our way. Tim's eyes were glued forward, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the steering wheel. Sorry, gentlemen, the guard finally called out. Without 2 IDs, I can't let you through. Are you joking? Tim shouted. I'm supposed to believe this is the only housing community on the West Coast that doesn't have undocumented workers. The guard's eyes narrowed. Not ones that show up at 11 o'clock at night. Now leave before I involve the authorities. Tim let out a defeated sigh. After a moment, he shifted the car into reverse. Wait, I interrupted. We're delivering insulin. Our paperwork shows that he ran out of it today. He could be having a medical emergency. The guard looked at me, his expression momentarily shocked. If that's the case, then we should call an ambulance. Why do you think we're here? Tim interjected. You think they call an ambulance every time someone is low on insulin? We make short notice deliveries at least 3 times a week. Given how remote this place is, it'll probably be over an hour until a city ambulance gets out here. So, they're expecting you. "I'll just give them a quick call," he said as he turned back to his phone. I glanced at Tim with wide eyes, and I noticed his hand on a pistol hidden in his waistband. I closed my eyes and laid my head back against the headrest, the only sound being the ringing of the speakerphone from inside the guard's booth and the pounding of blood in my ears. After a few moments, the speaker clicked, asking the guard to leave a voicemail. He could have passed out. "We need to get him his shots, please," Tim pleaded. "Right. The old man stuttered. "I want you to drive straight there. If I don't see you back out here in 30 minutes, I'm phoning the police." "Thank you, sir," I said, trying to muster a convincing smile. He moved to push the gate release button, but paused. His suspicion rekindled. "Wait, why don't you have an accent?" A lump formed in my throat with my mind racing for an answer. Without missing a beat, Tim cut in. "Wow, man, really? Why does he have to have an accent?" The guard's face reddened. "Oh, sorry, really sorry. My apologies." He fumbled with the controls, and the gate creaked open. We pulled forward, the tension in the car not easing until we were well past the gate and into the dark, winding streets. "You really should have had an accent," Tim muttered, breaking the silence. What was I supposed to do? Start speaking in broken English? I snapped back. "I mean, it wouldn't have hurt." He shrugged. As we wound our way up the serpentine roads, I rechecked my pack, a length of sturdy rope, a roll of duct tape, a Glock 19 with the serial number meticulously filed off, a compact flashlight, a lock-picking set, and a first aid kit, just in case things went south. I tried to lean back and relax as I gazed out the window at the wealthy and exclusive palatial houses. Italianate villas with terracotta roofs stood beside sleek, ultra-modern homes with glass walls that gleamed under the moonlight. Each residence was spaced far apart, separated by thick stone walls or dense hedges. Clearly, whoever lived here valued their privacy. The estate finally came into view, light permeating up from the house and courtyard into the black night like a spotlight on the hillside. Dozens of cars lined the driveway and filled the cul-de-sac. Groups of people approached a guarded checkpoint where security personnel frisked them and scanned their invitations. Once cleared, they were handed black cloaks and masks before entering the mansion. "This is bad. We should turn around." I panicked. "No, this is perfect," Tim replied, a confident edge to his voice. "They're handing out the disguises for us. We'll blend right in. Just keep it together." Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew there was no turning back. I mirrored Tim, slipping my gun into my waistband as we parked. I scanned the area, searching for a way to bypass security, but Tim was already out of the car, striding up the stone driveway. I hurried after him, trying to match his composure. As we approached, several security guards eyed us, their suspicion evident. "Delivery," he announced, opening his bag to reveal it was packed with bottles and syringes. The guard frowned. No one mentioned a delivery. Tim continued, "We have an order." I gave my delivery slip to the gate guard. "Feel free to call him." I gritted my teeth, waiting through the uncomfortable silence. "Hold on, I'll call Mr. Voss to confirm," the guard said, reaching for his radio. Before he could speak, a familiar voice interrupted. "No need. Gentlemen, they're with me." "Doctor," Wilcox emerged from the shadows with a malicious smile. I felt as if the wind had been knocked out of me. "Glad you could make it," he said in a sinister tone. "Wouldn't want you to miss the party." He waved us through, and a woman in an animal mask stepped forward, handing us robes and masks of our own. They confiscated Tim's bag, but left us otherwise unsearched. "Enjoy your evening." "Doctor," Wilcox added before turning to the guards, "make sure they don't leave before meeting me in the basement after the festivities." As Dr. Wilcox disappeared into the mansion, two guards moved in close behind us. Tim and I exchanged a wary glance before heading through the massive wooden doors. The first thing that hit me was the stench, sweat, animal musk, and incense. Around the foyer, People crawled on the ground like deranged animals. Some barked, others neighed, and a few sniffed each other like dogs, their movements ridiculously exaggerated. It took a moment to realize they were imitating the creatures on their masks. A sharp pressure slammed into my back, forcing me to my knees. I clutched the mask in my hand, a cat. With a heavy sigh, I slipped it on and dropped to all fours. The guard's grip was unforgiving as he snapped a collar around my neck, yanking me into the writhing crowd. I lost sight of Tim, the chaotic mass swallowing him up. He couldn't be enjoying this any more than I was. As I descended into the rabid throng, the animal sounds grew deafening. My senses were assaulted from all directions. Masked faces loomed in and out of view, their eyes wild and unhinged. The air was thick with heat and the reek of unwashed bodies, making each breath a struggle. Around the edges of the crowd, figures in white robes moved with calm. They held trays of hors d'oeuvres and waved ornate fans, their masks having no eye holes, leaving them presumably blind. It was obvious they were the servants, catering to the bizarre whims of the revelers. One servant caught my eye, towing a strange contraption behind him. It resembled an oversized censer, billowing thick, sweet-smelling smoke into the crowd. As the haze spread, those closest to it seemed to grow more frenzied, their movements becoming even more exaggerated and grotesque. They remained impassive as they maneuvered through the chaos, leaving a trail of confusion and heightened madness in their wake. An idea began to form, a desperate gambit in the midst of chaos. I pushed through the crowd, aiming for the thickest plumes of smoke. Holding my breath, I wove through the haze, my lungs burning with the effort. The sweet, cloying scent was almost overpowering, even without inhaling. I felt the guard's grip tighten, then falter as the smoke enveloped us. I turned sharply, making sure to drag the guard through the densest parts of the fog. Each pass was a test of endurance, my vision blurring as I fought the urge to breathe. Sweat dripped down my face, mixing with the oppressive heat and stench. After the fifth time, I could no longer avoid the inevitable. I gasped for air, the drug-laden smoke flooding my lungs. Disorientation set in swiftly, the world around me warping and twisting like a nightmarish hallucination. Colors bled into each other, smearing across my vision, and sounds morphed into distorted echoes, each bark and neigh reverberating through my skull. My limbs grew heavy, each movement a Herculean effort. The masked figures around me transformed into monstrous shapes, their exaggerated movements becoming sinister and menacing. The floor seemed to undulate beneath my hands and knees, making every step feel like I was sinking into quicksand. The guard was faring worse, his grip on the collar loosened, fingers twitching as the smoke took its toll. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and he swayed precariously. He stumbled once, a drunken lurch, then again, more violently, before collapsing in a heap, unconscious. I took a deep, shaky breath, my head swimming, and tried to focus. The room spun around me, the cacophony of animal sounds melding into a chaotic din. I had to find Tim before the effects overwhelmed me completely. My vision swam with swirling shapes and shifting colors, and each breath felt heavier, more labored. Fighting the growing disorientation, I scanned the room for any sign of him. My thoughts were fragmented, each one slipping away like water through my fingers. The servants in their eyeless masks floated past, strangely calm amidst the madness. I stumbled through the chaos, my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Each step was a battle against the disorienting haze and the oppressive heat that seemed to press down on me from all sides. Somehow, I managed to push through the mass of bodies, finding a door that led outside. The cool night air was a shock to my system. I collapsed to my knees, gulping in the fresh air, my head spinning. After a few moments, I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. I moved along the edge of the building. Then, I saw him. Tim was leaning against a wall, his face pale and strained. The tension eased slightly as I staggered towards him. He looked up with his eyes equally relieved. "George," he rasped. "You okay?" "Ugh." "Yeah," I panted, trying to steady my breath. "Barely. What about you?" "Ugh." Tim nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Managed to take care of my guard. He won't be bothering us anymore. Ugh. We need to get out of here, I said, glancing around the deserted grounds. Before Tim could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I spun around to see a figure standing right beside us. A servant in a white robe, their face hidden behind a mask, stood motionless, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvre. Jesus, Tim muttered, his hand twitching towards his waistband. Wait, I said. We took a cautious step forward, and the servant remained still, their silence unnerving. I felt a flicker of recognition, but couldn't place it. Slowly, I reached out and pulled off the mask. What I saw made my stomach lurch. It was the shopkeeper from earlier, but her eyes had been gouged out, and her mouth was stitched shut. Blood crusted around the crude stitches, and her empty eye socket stared blankly ahead. Tim recoiled. What the hell? Escaped his lips. The shopkeeper's chest heaved with shallow breaths, letting out a soft, pained moan barely audible above the discord emanating from inside. Oh my God, I stammered. What did they do to her? Ugh. Tim's face hardened. I don't know and I don't care. Let's go. We turned to leave, but the shopkeeper's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Her grip was cold and desperate, her head tilting as if trying to communicate. We can't leave her like this, I said, my voice trembling. Tim hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the figure. We don't have a choice. We can't help her. We need to find Chloe and get the hell out. Ugh. The shopkeeper's grip tightened, her breath ragged and wheezing through her nose. I forced myself to look at her, fighting the urge to turn away from the horror. I'm sorry, I whispered, prying her fingers off my wrist. I'm so sorry. Ugh. A low, resonant bell tolled somewhere deep within the mansion, the sound cutting through the night like a funeral knell. The discordant noises from inside suddenly ceased, replaced by a haunting quiet. For a moment, we stood unmoving in the silence. We heard the sound of shifting cloth as we watched through the windows. The revelers unanimously began to stand and filter out towards the backyard. They moved in a trance, like moths to a flame. Tim and I exchanged wary glances before sneaking to the edge of the house, watching the steady stream of black wade into the torchlit labyrinth. At the very back of the yard stood a massive stone sculpture resembling an owl, with a bonfire roaring at its feet. Standing on the platform was a row of servants. One in particular stood out from the rest. I couldn't see her face, I couldn't see her body, but I knew. It was her. It was Chloe. The night air was thick with the cloying scent of incense, mingling with the soft, ominous chants of the others. Each breath felt heavy, tainted with the stench of decay and something ancient, malevolent. My mask stuck uncomfortably to my face, the chill night air dampening the fabric pressed against my skin. Stay close, Tim whispered as we followed the procession into a vast courtyard, open to the night sky. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols and statues that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. My eyes never left Chloe standing near the altar, her posture vacant. There she is, I muttered to Tim before a heavy silence blanketed the courtyard. Marcus Voss emerged from the shadows, his presence like an eclipse, casting a pall over the gathered cultists. His predatory eyes scanned the assembly with a gaze that seemed to pierce the soul. Every movement he made was deliberate, each step echoing with an authority that demanded absolute obedience. Voss wore an intricate robe, its fabric a deep, abyssal black, embroidered with symbols emanating an otherworldly light. Behind him followed Dr. Wilcox. He too was robed in dark finery, his hands cradling a blade that gleamed under the flickering torchlight. Voss paused, allowing his presence to settle over the crowd. His voice, when it came, was a silken thread that wove through the silence. "Gather, my disciples," he intoned. "Tonight, we unveil the true faces of those who dare to seek true understanding." Voss turned to the three standing there, with Chloe at the end. His gaze lingered on each one. "Doctor," Wilcox stepped forward, raising the blade high for all to see. It looked identical to the one plunged into my side not a week prior. He held it there for a moment, before lowering it and gesturing back to Voss. But first, he continued, there is the matter of retribution. 2 men were dragged forward, their bodies covered in dirt and nearly naked save for mud-stained briefs and burlap sacks over their heads. They struggled weakly. The men holding them ripped away the sacks, revealing the terrified faces of the orderlies from the hospital. Voss's gaze swept the crowd once more. As many of you know, he began, a profane presence has infiltrated our sacred rites, corrupting our rituals. I've been informed that he skulks among you, thinking himself hidden at this very moment. The crowd stirred, masked faces turning this way and that in search of the intruder. I mimicked their movements, trying to stay hidden. Worry not. Let him be. Let him see our ways, Voss declared. Let him understand. He turned his attention back to the orderlies. These men, he spat, were coerced by another profane. They betrayed our order to save the one who defiled our sanctuary. I ask of you, what should be their punishment? A clamor began amongst the followers. Death rang out from the crowd. Blindness, shouted another. Voss held his hand up as the silence returned. I am nothing if not your servant. But these are punishments for the profane. These men were trusted. It is one thing to violate our order, but it is another to have seen the light and to turn away. Purificatio, a solitary voice emanated from the crowd. Purificatio, Voss repeated with a smile. Is this our final judgment? The men pleaded with Voss, their voices drowned out by the crescendo of voices in the crowd repeating Purificatio. I glanced at Tim, whose eyes were glued on Chloe. Voss held his hand up once more, and once again the silence returned. He announced, the will of the collective is divine, before gesturing to Dr. Wilcox. The orderlies' pleas grew more desperate, imbued with fear and sorrow that only fueled the fervor of the crowd. The men were dragged, kicking and screaming, towards the giant bonfire at the foot of the colossal owl statue, its eyes gleaming in the firelight. As we positioned ourselves towards the front of the crowd, I took in the stage with renewed clarity. The statue's base was hollowed into an oven, its edges licked by relentless flames. Smoke spiraled upwards, drawn through the statue's hollow core, escaping from the glowing eye holes of the owl, as if brooding over the scene below. The flames roared hungrily, their heat sweltering even from a distance. The men's screams grew louder, their faces contorted with sheer terror as they were forced closer to the inferno. Their skin glistened with sweat, their eyes wide with the primal fear of impending death. They struggled against their captors, but the grips that held them were unyielding, eyes alight with fanatic zeal. With a final shove, the men were cast into the roaring bonfire. Their initial screams pierced the night, high and shrill, a horrifying symphony of agony. The intense heat quickly blistered their skin, causing it to bubble and peel away, revealing raw, sensitive nerves. Their bodies convulsed, muscles contracting violently into contorted shapes. The flames, voracious and unrelenting, licked at their flesh, the crackling sound of burning skin mingling with their cries. The smell of burning flesh and hair filled the air. As the fire intensified, the men's skin charred and blackened, turning to ash in some places, while other parts still writhed in agony. The flames reached higher, consuming clothing and flesh alike, leaving behind smoldering, skeletal remains. The horrifying sight was punctuated by the popping and sizzling sounds of fat and muscle burning away. Their screams, once loud and piercing, turned into guttural moans as the flames ravaged them. Each breath drew in searing heat, causing their throats and lungs to blister and burn from within. Their movements became slower, more spasmodic, as their bodies succumbed to the overwhelming heat and pain. The crowd stood transfixed, their eyes reflecting the hellish glow of the bonfire. The chants of purification had ceased, replaced by an awed silence. The statue's stone gaze seemed to judge the proceedings with approval. As the men's bodies were reduced to smoldering husks, their final moments of suffering faded into the night, until only the crackling of the fire remained. Voss stepped forward, his face illuminated by the dying flames. Mourn for them not. Their souls have been cleaned. They reside beside Nuit now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he paused. It is time for the main event. Voss's commanding presence intensified as he extended a hand towards the first masked initiate. A figure almost trembling with palpable dread. Step forward, he directed in a tone that brooked no argument. The initiate, in a bid to hide his unease, mustered what semblance of composure he could. From beneath his cloth, Voss unveiled a heart-shaped stone. This, Voss declared with gravity, is the heart of Nyarlathotep. To prove your purification, you must embrace it fully. Do not release until commanded. Tentative yet compelled, the initiate removed his mask and reached out, his fingertips trembling as they made contact with the stone. The moment his grip tightened, his knees buckled under an unseen weight. Blue tendrils, spectral and chilling, seemed to snake up his arm, drawing gasps from the assembled crowd. Blessed is he, Voss intoned softly, almost reverently, as the initiate's struggles ceased. You have proven worthy. Release. The initiate collapsed, spent and limp, as the crowd erupted in fervent cheers. Voss, ever the orchestrator, directed, bring him to my quarters to recover, as attendants hurried to assist the fallen man. I turned to Tim to ensure I was not imagining this, but to my shock he was gone. I trashed my head around looking for him, only to be met with the suspicious glances from the other members. I quieted myself, feeling by heart ready to burst out of my chest. Embrace, Voss commanded once more to the initiate next in line. He, eager or perhaps desperate to prove himself, clasped the stone with haste. The tendrils returned, more aggressive than before, a dance of light and shadow upon his flesh. Moments later, a scream tore through the silence, raw and harrowing, as he let go of the stone in agony. In a swift, fluid motion, Dr. Wilcox advanced upon him. As others restrained him, the doctor drew his blade and plucked out his eyes, one after another. As the young man's screams filled the air, the others forced his mouth shut, holding him still. From his waistband, Dr. Wilcox produced a string, and with the calm of a seasoned artisan, he began to stitch the initiate's lips together, sealing the screams within as the crowd cheered as before. Voss waved dismissively, a cold finality in his voice. Take him for reorientation. Another life. Perhaps, he murmured, turning his attention to Chloe. Suddenly, Tim's voice shattered the suspense. Guess again, motherfucker. His arm shot out, snaking around Voss's neck in a tight headlock. His gun pressing against the temple, Voss strained under Tim's grip, his face contorting with discomfort. Timothy, the dramatics are unbecoming, Voss managed to choke out, his voice strained but mocking. Shut up, bitch, Tim hissed. She's not your slave anymore. We're getting out of here. Voss chuckled darkly, his voice raspy. Accusations of slavery. Yet here you are, dictating terms you think she wants to follow. Tim's eyes flicked to Chloe, searching her face. Her expression was unreadable, distant. Guards surged forward, their weapons raised, creating a tight circle around them. Gentlemen, gentlemen, are we but animals? Voss laughed. Let the lady choose, I say. Turning to one of the guards, he snapped. Give her your weapon. The guard, clearly conflicted, hesitated only a moment before handing his gun to Chloe. She took it, her hand steady, examining the firearm with calm. Choose, my dear, Voss whispered, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Chloe lifted the gun, her aim steady. As she directed the weapon, her finger tightened on the trigger. A loud crack split the air. Tim cried out, his gun clattering to the ground as he clutched his hand, blood spurting between his fingers. The bullet had torn through his palm, leaving a ragged, gruesome wound. Bone fragments and torn flesh were visible, and blood pooled rapidly on the stage floor. his face contorted in agony as shock and betrayal flashed in his eyes. Voss's gaze softened as he turned to Chloe, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My dear, their desperation only tightens our bond, doesn't it?" The words made my stomach churn. "By the way, that's the one," Voss declared, his finger unmistakably pointing at me amidst the throng. "Sticks out like a sore thumb. Bring the three of them to my quarters. The other initiate will have to wait." Shadows moved swiftly around me, their black cloaks blurring into the night. Rough hands grabbed me, binding my arms with rope. From my peripheral vision, I saw Tim on the stage, already being restrained, the assistants fumbling with his ropes due to his mangled hand. Beside Voss, Chloe walked obediently, her steps matching the steady pace set by Dr. Wilcox trailing close behind. The room exuded opulence. An ornate chandelier cast a soft, golden light over rich wood paneling and crimson velvet drapes. Voss sat behind an imposing desk, smoke from his cigar coiling around him like a serpent. Chloe perched beside him, her face unreadable. Tim and I were bound to heavy chairs, the ropes biting into our wrists. Voss's eyes glimmered with amusement. "Gentlemen, your little adventure ends here. But humor me, what did you hope to achieve with this? Foolishness." I remained silent, my gaze fixed on Chloe. Though she avoided eye contact, I caught a fleeting twitch in her fingers. Nothing to say. Voss chuckled, nodding to Dr. Wilcox. The doctor approached with a tray of instruments. "Perhaps we need to be more persuasive." "That won't be necessary," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We both know there's more at stake here than just us." Voss's eyebrow arched. "Oh, do enlighten me." I allowed a small smile. "You didn't think we would come unprepared, did you?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Voss's face, quickly masked by contempt. "You're bluffing. You have nothing. Are you willing to bet everything on that?" I challenged. Voss leaned back, studying me. "What do you want?" "Release us. All of us, including Chloe." A bark of laughter escaped Voss. "You're in no position to make demands. Perhaps a demonstration of our methods will loosen your tongue." He gestured to Wilcox. "I wouldn't," I warned. "Not unless you want tonight's events broadcasted to the world." Voss frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Explain, now." I took a deep breath. "I recorded everything. There's a camera hidden in my collar. Every word, every action, it's all on video." Voss's amusement vanished, replaced by cold fury. He gestured to Wilcox, who stepped forward and ripped the tiny device from my collar. "So much for your leverage," Voss sneered, crushing the device under his heel. "You think I'd make it that easy? That wasn't a recorder, Voss. It was a transmitter." The color drained from Voss's face. Beside him, I saw Chloe's eyes widen slightly. "Everything, including you murdering two men in cold blood, has been streaming live. A journalist named Kelly has it all." Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Voss's face contorted with rage, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. "You're lying," he snarled, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Care to take that chance?" I challenged. "Release us now, and maybe we can come to an arrangement before this goes public." Voss's eyes darted between Tim, Chloe, and me, calculating. The tension in the room was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Prove your loyalty," he snarled, shoving the ceremonial dagger into her hands. "Kill one of them, now." My heart plummeted as Chloe stood, her face an impenetrable mask. She approached slowly, the dagger glinting in the chandelier's light. Tim struggled against his bonds, but I remained still, my eyes fixed on Chloe's. There was something there, buried deep beneath the surface, a flicker of the woman I knew. "Wait," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "We'll join you. If this is what Chloe wants, then I want it too. We'll do anything you ask." Voss's eyes gleamed with triumph. Chloe paused before me, raising the dagger. Time seemed to slow, the room holding its breath. She leaned in close, her lips nearly touching my ear. For a moment, I thought I saw a hint of a smile. Then, she whispered, "I never took you for the religious type." In a blur of motion, Chloe spun around, plunging the blade towards Voss's chest. Voss, with surprising agility for a man his age, caught her wrist mere inches from his heart. "You disappoint me," he growled, his eyes flashing with rage. Chloe snarled, "I was never yours, you monster." Taking advantage of the distraction, I managed to work one hand free from my bonds. As I struggled with the other, Tim did the same, both of us driven by desperation. Chloe fought against Voss's grip, her face contorted with effort. "Help me," she shouted, her voice strained. Finally free, Tim and I launched ourselves into the fray. I tackled Voss from behind, trying to break his hold on Chloe, while Tim lunged for Dr. Wilcox, who had been moving towards the door. The room descended into chaos. Voss lashed out with surprising strength, his elbow catching me in the ribs and sending me reeling. Through the mayhem, I caught glimpses of Tim grappling with Wilcox. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the desk, swinging it at Voss. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, but lost his footing in the process. Chloe seized the moment, wrenching her arm free and reclaiming the dagger. With a fierce cry, she plunged it into Voss's chest. Voss's scream was piercing, filled with pain and disbelief. He stumbled backward, clutching at the dagger protruding from his chest, before collapsing to the floor. As suddenly as it began, everything went still. The only sound was our heavy breathing and Voss's weakening gasps. Voss crumpled to the floor, the unearthly light fading from his eyes. "You don't understand," he gasped, what I was trying to prevent. His final words died on his lips as the last breath left his body. We stood there, panting, surrounded by the wreckage of the confrontation. Chloe's hands were shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I had to play along, to protect you both. I never thought it would go this far." I pulled her into an embrace, feeling her sob against my chest. "It's okay," I murmured. "It's over now." A grunt of pain drew our attention. Tim had Dr. Wilcox pinned against the wall, his uninjured fist raised. The doctor's face was already swollen, blood trickling from his nose and split lip. "Tim, stop," Chloe cried out, but her brother seemed beyond reason, years of pent-up rage pouring out in a relentless assault. Tim's fist connected again and again, each impact punctuated by a sickening thud. Blood sprayed with every blow, splattering across the ornate wallpaper and pooling on the polished floor. Despite the agony that must have been shooting through his shattered hand, Tim showed no sign of slowing down, his face contorted in a rictus of fury and pain. Wilcox's legs buckled, but Tim held him up, unwilling to let his target slip away. The doctor's head lolled, consciousness clearly fading, yet Tim's onslaught continued unabated. "Tim," I shouted, the urgency of our situation finally breaking through his rage-induced trance. "We have to go." Tim's fist froze mid-swing. He blinked, as if coming out of a daze, and let Wilcox slump to the floor in a bloody heap. Panting heavily, he stared at his hands, one mangled and swollen, the other slick with blood. "Here," Chloe said softly, tearing a strip of fabric from her robes. With gentle efficiency, she wrapped Tim's shattered hand, her touch seeming to ground him further in reality. Chloe's eyes locked with Tim's, relief and apprehension in her gaze. "Tim," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I had to play along, to stay alive, to protect you both." Tim's face softened, the rage melting away. He pulled his sister into a tight embrace, his injured hand forgotten in the moment of reunion. I opened my mouth to speak, but a faint sound caught my attention. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a flicker of movement in the shadowed corner. There, half hidden behind a heavy curtain, stood a cultist. His eyes were wide with terror, darting frantically between the bodies on the floor and us. "Hey," I shouted, but it was too late. The cultist, In his panic, stumbled backwards. He collided with a tall candelabrum, sending it crashing to the floor. Flames licked at the luxurious carpet, quickly catching and spreading. Tim lunged forward, but the cultist scrambled to his feet. Wild-eyed and frantic, he bolted for the door, knocking over a chair in his haste. "Voss and Wilcox are dead. They're dead," he screamed, his voice rising to a panicked wail. As he reached the door, he swung it open with such force that it struck Tim, causing him to stumble back, clutching his side. The cultists' screams echoed through the stone corridors, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and frantic shouts. A wave of chaos was crashing towards us. The noise from the cultists swelled, an ominous chant beginning to echo through the corridors. The fire was spreading rapidly, smoke beginning to fill the room. Chloe's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. "There's a passage behind that tapestry. I've seen Wilcox use it," she said urgently, pointing to a heavy drape hanging on the wall. We rushed to it, pushing it aside to reveal a narrow wooden door. Chloe tried the handle, but it didn't budge. "It's locked," she muttered. Then her eyes lit up.
"The key Voss must have."
She ran to Voss's body and rifled through his robes. Her hands trembled as she searched, finally discovering a hidden compartment. She pulled out a small, ornate key. As she did, an object fell from Voss's cloak and rolled across the floor, the heart-shaped stone. Without thinking, I snatched it up, wrapping it in a nearby cloth before shoving it into my pocket. Chloe jammed the key into the lock. With a heavy click, the door creaked open. We stumbled inside, the air immediately cooler and damp. I slammed the door shut behind us, catching one last glimpse of the room engulfed in flames. The passage was narrow, the walls almost brushing our shoulders. "This way," Chloe whispered, leading us deeper into the unknown. As we hurried through the twisting corridor, the chaos behind us faded, replaced by the soft drip of water and the occasional scurrying of unseen creatures. Each step echoed in the silence, broken only by our ragged breathing. We passed alcoves filled with forgotten relics, rusted tools, decayed cloth, and crumbling books. The floor became increasingly unstable, loose stones shifting under our feet. Suddenly, Chloe stopped short. Ahead, the passage split into 3 identical corridors, each disappearing into darkness. Strange symbols glowed above each entrance, pulsing with an ominous light. I don't know which way," Chloe admitted, her voice trembling. As we stood there, uncertain, a low, inhuman growl echoed from one of the passages. It was then I realized our escape from one nightmare might have led us straight into another. The tunnel forked before us, 2 gaping maws of darkness stretching into the unknown. Strange, unsettling sounds echoed from both directions, a mix of distant screams and something that sounded disturbingly like wet, tearing flesh. "Which way?" Tim whispered, his face pale. Before anyone could answer, a guttural moan reverberated through the left passage, sending chills down my spine. Without a word, we collectively moved towards the right. As we pressed on, the tunnel grew narrower, the ceiling lower. The walls closed in, slick with some unknown moisture. The air grew thick and oppressive, reeking of decay and something metallic, like old blood. The tunnel suddenly opened into a vast chamber as our eyes adjusted. The full horror of what lay before us became clear. Dozens of people, if you could still call them that, shuffled aimlessly around the room. Their skin was a pallid grey, hanging loosely on emaciated frames, but it was their faces that turned my stomach. Where eyes should have been, there were only raw, weeping sockets. Their mouths were sewn shut with thick, black thread, the flesh around the stitches red and infected. "Jesus Christ," Tim gagged, barely suppressing a retch. Chloe's face had gone ashen. "The reorientation room," she whispered, her voice quavering. "Boss, he talked about it, but I never imagined." One of the figures lurched towards us, empty sockets somehow fixed on our position. Its mouth worked against the stitches, producing a muffled, agonized moan. Over there! I pointed to a door on the far side of the room. That might be our way out. We skirted the edges of the room, trying to avoid the shambling figures. Their eyeless gazes seemed to follow our every move. Tim reached the door first, grasping the handle. He cracked it open and peered out, then quickly slammed it shut, locking it. Shit, he hissed. They're out there, searching for us. What now? Chloe asked, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, a new scent cut through the room's miasma. Smoke, the acrid smell of something burning. Do you smell that? I asked. Tim sniffed the air. Smoke. The fire must have spread. As he spoke, Tim suddenly swayed on his feet, the color draining from his already pale face. The makeshift bandage around his wrist was soaked through with blood. He looked like a ghost, barely able to stand. Tim, Chloe cried, rushing to support him as he slumped to the ground. Is this how you thought this would play out? A voice drawled from behind us. I spun around. There stood Voss, alive and seemingly unharmed, stroking the cheek of a vacant-eyed woman beside him. They're beautiful, aren't they? He murmured, his gaze caressing the mutilated figures around us. Perfection, freed from the prison of the self. How? I stammered, unable to comprehend his presence. We saw you die. Voss smiled. Death is a door, and I hold the keys. He spread his arms wide. Behold true enlightenment. The shambling figures began to close in around us, their muffled moans rising to a fevered pitch. Smoke started to seep under the door, and Tim's breathing grew more labored. The weight of the stone in my pocket felt like an anchor, dragging me down into depths I couldn't fathom. Around us, the eyeless, mutilated figures shuffled restlessly, their muffled moans a haunting chorus that set my teeth on edge. The air hung heavy with the stench of fear and something else, something ancient and wrong. Voss stood before us, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and... was that fear? I couldn't be sure. Nothing made sense anymore. Your ignorance is a blessing, Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. You dance on the edge of an abyss, unaware of the horrors that lurk in its depths. My jaw clenched, anger and confusion warring within me. I glanced at Tim, barely conscious beside me, then at Chloe, her face determined. What are you talking about, Voss? What could possibly justify this? I gestured at the mutilated figures surrounding us. A bitter laugh escaped Voss's lips. Justification. There is no justification, only necessity. The old ones are stirring. George, their awakening is inevitable, and when they rise, reality itself will unravel. As he spoke, I noticed a subtle shift in the eyeless horrors around us. Their constant, pained moans began to change, taking on a different cadence. Some swayed slightly, others twitched as if picking up on some inaudible frequency. You're insane, Tim muttered, his voice weak but defiant. Voss's eyes blazed with fervent intensity. Insanity would be a comfort, a shelter from the truths I've witnessed. These, he swept his arm towards the eyeless figures, are not victims, but the vanguard of humanity's survival. Survival. I spat the word out, disgust churning in my gut. You call this mutilation survival? I call it preparation, Voss hissed. When the old ones awaken, their mere presence will shatter minds and rend souls. These chosen few, they are being inoculated against the coming storm. The stone in my pocket seemed to pulse in response to Voss's words. I couldn't take it anymore. In a moment of desperation, I pulled it out. Holding it high, it was still wrapped in the cloth from earlier, preventing contact with my skin. The pulsating heart-shaped stone cast a pallid glow across the chamber. Voss's eyes widened, as reverence and fear etched across his face. Enough of this madness, I growled, my voice steadier than I felt. Let us go, or I swear I'll shatter this thing into a million pieces. Voss's laughter this time was tinged with genuine regret. If only it were that simple. George, do you think you're the first to try? I've seen that stone survive nuclear fire and the crushing depths of the ocean. Many have tried to destroy it. All have failed. The stone seemed to pulse faster in my grip, as if reacting to Voss's words. I felt Chloe tense beside me, her eyes fixed on the artifact. "You're lying," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be the only way." Voss turned his gaze to her, a mix of pity and resignation in his eyes. "If only it were a lie. Child, the truths I've seen would shatter your sanity." As they spoke, the figure's movements became more pronounced. Hands clenched and unclenched, heads tilted as if listening to a distant call. The air grew thick with tension, an almost electric charge building around us. "And what about their sanity?" Chloe demanded, gesturing to the mutilated figures around us. "You've already destroyed them." "A necessary sacrifice," Voss replied, his voice heavy. "Better a fraction of humanity endure this fate than for all to be consumed when the old ones awaken." I saw something change in Chloe's eyes then, a spark of defiance, of terrible resolve. She took a step towards me, her gaze locked on the heart-shaped stone in my hand. "Chloe, don't," I warned, instinctively pulling the stone closer to my chest. A part of me knew what she was about to do, and I was terrified. She met my eyes, and I saw a determination that chilled me to my core. "No more secrets," she said, her voice resonating with resolve. "No more lies. If there's truth to be known, I'll tear it from the void myself." Time seemed to slow. I saw Chloe's hand reaching for the stone, and Voss's face contorted in awe and horror. I wanted to stop her, to pull away, but my body wouldn't respond. Chloe's fingers touched the stone. Purple tendrils, like living veins, erupted from its surface, snaking up her arms. Her eyes widened, then began to glow with a purple light. The stone seemed to fuse with her touch, and she stood rigid, her gaze fixed on something beyond the confines of our reality. An unnatural stillness fell over the room. Chloe's chest barely moved, her breathing shallow and slow. The purple tendrils pulsed with a rhythm, as if carrying unspoken messages between Chloe and whatever cosmic entity she now communed with. Voss's eyes darted between Chloe and the mutilated figures surrounding us. "Impossible," he said, a tremor in his voice. "She shouldn't be able to." A low, guttural sound began to build from the throats of the eyeless ones. It started as a hum but quickly grew in intensity. Their bodies began to twitch more violently, heads snapping back and forth as if in the throes of a seizure. "We need to stop this," Voss said, taking a step toward Chloe. "If she fully bridges the gap between our world and theirs." I moved to block him, my heart pounding. "Don't you dare touch her." The humming crescendoed into a discordant wail. Several of the figures began to claw at their sewn-shut mouths, blood trickling down their chins as they tore at the stitches. Voss's face had gone pale, real fear in the lines of his face. "This can't be happening," he muttered, almost to himself. "The barriers, they're breaking down." I looked back at Chloe. Her eyes, still glowing that unearthly purple, had begun to leak tears of the same color. They trailed down her cheeks like alien rivers, dripping onto the pulsing stone in her grasp. The wailing reached a fever pitch. I clapped my hands over my ears, the sound threatening to split my skull. Through the cacophony, I heard Voss shouting, "We have to sever the connection. If we don't, they'll come through. Don't you understand? They'll devour everything." But before any of us could move, before we could even think of how to stop what was happening, the eyeless figures suddenly fell silent. As one, their ruined faces turned towards Voss. In that moment of terrible quiet, I saw real, absolute terror dawn on Voss's face. "No," he whispered. "Please, no." Then chaos erupted. The nearest figure lunged at Voss with inhuman speed, gnarled hands gripping his robes. Voss's scream pierced the air as more of the mutilated horrors swarmed him, their sewn mouths working against their stitches in a frenzied hunger. I grabbed Tim, supporting his weight as we backed away from the gruesome scene. Chloe remained motionless, locked in her cosmic trance, the purple tendrils pulsing along her arms in an eldritch rhythm. "We have to go," I shouted over the sounds of rending flesh and Voss's agonized screams. The eyeless horde turned towards us, their ruined faces somehow conveying a terrible hunger. My heart thundered in my chest as they shuffled forward. backing us against the wall. But just as I braced for the end, the horde surged past us. They burst through the door, their muffled shrieks echoing through the mansion, the sounds of chaos, shattering glass, splintering wood, and terrified screams filled the air. "What's happening?" Tim gasped. "I don't know," I replied, my eyes fixed on Chloe's eerily still form. "But we need to get out of here, now." As we moved towards the exit, stepping over Voss's ravaged remains, Chloe suddenly gasped. The purple glow faded from her eyes, and she stumbled, the heart falling from her grasp. As it fell to the floor, it disintegrated into ash before blowing away in the wind. "Chloe," I caught her before she could fall. "Are you okay? What did you see?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror that I knew would haunt me forever. "Everything," she said. "I saw everything." An explosion rocked the mansion, the distant roar of flames a grim punctuation to Chloe's words. "We can talk later," I said firmly, trying to suppress the panic in my voice. "We need to move." Supporting Tim with one arm and Chloe with the other, I led them out of the chamber. The once opulent hallways had become a labyrinth of horror. Blood smeared the walls, and the sounds of destruction grew louder with each passing moment. We burst through the mansion's twisted remains, and reality shattered around us. The night, far from offering relief, tasted of ounson and impossible colors. What was once a manicured lawn had become a tapestry of nightmares. The sky above churned, not with clouds but with vast, undulating forms that defied comprehension. Countless eyes, each as large as the moon, peered down with curiosity, their gaze scraped against my sanity like nails on a chalkboard. With each passing heartbeat, the world around us unraveled further. The very air seemed to ripple, carrying whispers in languages never meant for human tongues. Gravity fluctuated wildly. One moment we were light as feathers, the next crushed against the ground by invisible weight. The path beneath our feet bubbled and shifted, sometimes solid, sometimes as insubstantial as mist. A sound like 1,000 screaming violins emanated from the sky. The ornate fountain at the center of the grounds erupted, spewing not water but a viscous, black fluid. "Right," I shouted, my voice distorting strangely. We veered onto a stone path, the only constant in this chaos. It led towards a massive hedge maze, its walls twisting and reforming, faces of ecstasy and agony blooming in the leaves. Through a gap in the shifting greenery, I spotted our car. "There," Chloe called, echoing my thoughts. The car. Suddenly, space itself seemed to hiccup. Distances stretched and compressed erratically. One step carried us inches, the next flung us yards ahead. I saw ghostly echoes of actions we hadn't yet taken, heard fragments of conversations yet to occur. "Don't look," Chloe warned, her voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Don't try to make sense of it." I gritted my teeth and focused on the car ahead, our beacon of normality in this nightmare. But the path beneath our feet had other ideas. It began to twist and undulate, like a giant serpent trying to shake us off its back. We staggered forward, the world lurching around us. One moment the car seemed just inches from our grasp. The next it was impossibly far away. The driveway stretched and contracted, coiling back on itself in loops and spirals that hurt the eyes to follow. "Keep moving," I shouted, though I wasn't sure if any sound actually left my mouth. The air felt thick, resistant, as if we were trying to run underwater. Tim stumbled, nearly dropping the shopkeeper. I grabbed his arm, and we pressed on. Each step was a battle against a reality that no longer played by any rules we understood. Suddenly, the path bucked violently. We were airborne, tumbling through space that folded and unfolded around us. In that eternal instant, I saw reflections of ourselves from impossible angles, heard echoes of screams that might have been our own. Then, we collided with something solid. The breath was driven from my lungs as we crashed into the unforgiving surface of the car. Somehow, miraculously, we'd been thrown directly into it. Gasping and disoriented, we scrambled to right ourselves. The world still swam around us, reality and nightmare bleeding into each other at the edges, but the car remained solid, our anchor in the chaos. Without a word, we yanked open the doors and piled in, half expecting the vehicle to dissolve beneath us. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, the familiar roar of the engine cutting through the impossible sounds. We peeled away, tires screeching against asphalt that still seemed to ripple and shift. In the rearview mirror, I watched the mansion recede, twisting and warping before folding inward, collapsing into a point of infinite madness and blinking out of existence. As we sped down the winding driveway, the world slowly began to reassert itself. The impossible visions faded, replaced by the dark, tree-lined road. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder with each passing second. Tim's voice broke the tense silence, barely a whisper. "Is it over?" I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty, the horrors we'd left behind seemingly gone. "Yeah," I exhaled, feeling a knot in my chest start to loosen. "I think it is." Chloe stirred in the back seat, her hand resting protectively on the still unconscious shopkeeper. "The cops will be there soon," she murmured. "They'll find whatever's left." As we reached the main road, I eased off the accelerator. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my throat, and soon we were all joining in, a release of tension that bordered on mania. The first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. It was a refreshing sight after the nightmarish hues we'd left behind, a reminder that the normal world still existed. We drove in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts, the weight of what we'd witnessed an invisible burden we'd carry forever. The shopkeeper stirred, mumbling incoherently before settling back into unconsciousness. We'd have to figure out what to do about her, but that was a problem for later. For now, we were alive, we were safe, we had escaped. 5 years, 2 months, and 13 days. Not that I'm counting. The official story was that 24 people died in a house fire due to faulty wiring and bad insulation. The governor even sponsored a bill, the Voss Act, to require more stringent fire regulations for larger residential homes. When I read about it online, I laughed until I cried. Some nights, I still wake up screaming, my throat raw, the details of the nightmare slipping away like smoke. In those moments, doubt creeps in. Did it really happen? Was Voss right about the old ones? Or was it all just an elaborate hallucination born from drug-laced smoke and group hysteria? For the first few months, Chloe was there for me. We never talked specifics, but it was nice to just be around someone who knew, someone who understood. I'd give anything for that video recording. You remember the one hidden in my collar? Right, it wasn't a transmitter. Voss destroyed the evidence the instant I disclosed its existence. I suppose I hadn't really thought that one through. I'd do anything for tangible evidence, but I'm left with nothing but memories that feel more like fever dreams with each passing day. We didn't make it out of there without our fair share of scars. I felt closed off, like I couldn't express myself. Chloe, on the other hand, threw herself into her art. Her new style was all abstract curves and impossible angles that made my eyes hurt to look at. Raw emotion given form. One critic called it, if they only knew the horrors that inspired it. As days turned into weeks, Chloe became so consumed by her work, she almost didn't notice me anymore. We were living together, but it felt like we were worlds apart. Each of us was dealing with that night in our own way, and those ways just didn't seem to mesh. After some time, we finally admitted to what we'd both known for a while. It was time to part ways. It wasn't anybody's fault, really. Sometimes shared trauma brings people together, and sometimes it pulls them apart. For us, it was the latter. Tim did his time quietly, finding comfort in the rigid routine of prison. Nothing unknowable in a 6x8 cell, he'd say with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Now he works security for some secretive tech firm, dealing with things he can't talk about. I often wonder if he's found new horrors to replace the old. After Kelly got her story about the cult and the fire kicked back yet again, she felt it was time to venture out on her own. Luckily, Her podcast really took off. Whispers in the Static, she called it. A place for people to share experiences they couldn't share anywhere else. It was huge in the trucker community, for whatever reason. The shopkeeper, Leilani, I finally learned, worked as Kelly's producer now. She wasn't exactly qualified, of course, but you've never met a harder worker. When Kelly invited us to record a special episode, a reunion of the damned, I almost declined, but some part of me hoped that maybe talking about it would help me understand. The others were already there when I arrived. Tim had lost weight, all sharp angles now. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Chloe with a noticeable white streak in her hair. Leilani's fingers drummed a rhythm on her laptop while Kelly fussed with her equipment. Weird weather lately. Huh, Tim said a bit louder than was necessary. You've noticed it too, I cut in. I thought it was just me. Not just the weather. Chloe followed. I saw a news story the other day of an animal attack in New Brunswick. The bodies they found weren't right. We each took turns talking about all the oddities we'd noticed. Benign, at face value, but we all felt like there was something deeper in all of them. Something unseen. The conversation transitioned to our personal experiences. I felt waves of relief wash over me as I was able to express myself for the first time in forever. We were almost an hour in before I noticed the green recording light had been on the entire time. I wondered how much of our story the listeners would believe, how much we believed it ourselves. After the recording had finished, we spent another half hour talking, laughing, and reminiscing like old friends. The world had felt so foreign to me for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be surrounded by people who truly get me. On my way out, I found Chloe perched against the wall, smoking in the rain. "You're smoking now?" I asked. "Helps me relax. One of the few things that still does," she replied with a sad smile. I stopped for a moment to just look at her. She looked more elegant, refined, but still the same girl I remembered playing video games on our bed. My brow furrowed. "How are you holding up?" "About as well as you are, I imagine." She stomped out her cigarette. "So, are you seeing anybody?" I asked. My voice cracked a bit at the end. "Huh? No." Her response caught me a bit off guard. Nobody wants to be with a cracked-out abstract artist. "Well, I wouldn't say nobody," I said, looking into her eyes. The car she was waiting for pulled up without her acknowledging it. She just continued to stare at me with curious eyes and a crooked smile. The driver exited the vehicle, coming around to open the door for her. I guess she wasn't taking Ubers anymore. "Well, this is me," she said, standing outside the car as she looked over. "Text me sometime, won't you? You still have my number," she said softly, looking at the ground. Yeah, I think so," I replied. "Good," she said, before finally sitting in the car and being driven off into the night. Walking home through downtown Seattle, I let the cool rain wash over my face. The city around me felt both familiar and alien, much like my own thoughts these days. As I navigated the bustling streets, memories of those few chaotic weeks years ago resurfaced. Chloe's kidnapping, Tim's unexpected appearance, Kelly's daring rescue, and getting stabbed with a goddamn short sword. Sometimes I wonder about the path not taken. What if we'd stayed home that night? How different would the world be? What would have become of the cult? But such thoughts are as futile as they are persistent. That's not the world I live in. This is my reality. This is my life, shaped by choices I can't undo and experiences I can't explain. Despite the haze of hallucinogens that night, a part of me still believes it was real, that those horrors lurk just behind a thin veil, their tentacles already reaching into our world in subtle ways. One day, I'll ask Chloe about her experience with the stone, what she saw, what she said. Yet, one thing haunts me more than anything else. Voss's final words that he was trying to prevent something, trying to save us all. I'm no closer to understanding what he meant now than I was then. As I reach my apartment, I realize that's what I've been doing all along. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every flash of memory. It's all been part of my journey to understand in the wake of the incomprehensible. And while I may never fully grasp the cosmic forces at play, I'll never stop trying to understand my place within them. In the end, maybe that's all any of us can do. Keep seeking, keep questioning, keep trying to understand ourselves in a world that sometimes seems determined to defy understanding. I know that I will. There is no official record of the exorcism we performed at 1237 Palmer Avenue in Los Angeles last November. The church encourages us not to speak to the press about such things anyway, as our work tends to be sensationalized. In truth, most cases we investigate aren't possessions at all, just ordinary, tragic mental health issues wearing the trappings of religion. I was still only a year into my apprenticeship back then. Up to that point, even in the few instances when I'd witnessed a genuine possession, the process of exorcism was far more mundane than the movies would have you believe. My mentor, Father Anthony, would simply follow the protocols as outlined by the Holy See, sprinkling with holy water, laying of hands, and exfoliation, along with the recitation of the prescribed prayers. Only once had I seen the basic prayers fail. It was a case where the entity within an elderly woman had been allowed to fester, possibly as long as 5 years. The family had spent half a decade ignoring the problem, ascribing it to ordinary dementia, even as her behavior grew worse and worse. We had been called in after she'd twisted the head off a beloved family cat, all while invoking the names of minor demons she had no business knowing. Even then, Father Anthony had been able to remove the demon in less than a week, relying on the prayer to Saint Michael and a silver cross that had once belonged to Pope Leo XIII. Nothing could have prepared either of us for what we found on Palmer Avenue. We were sent there at the behest of Father Felipe, a parish priest who noticed that Maya Knowles, one of the young women attending his church, had missed several weeks of Sunday Mass. It's unfortunately common for young people to fall out of love with the faith, but it raised a small flag for the Father Felipe, who caught up with her mother, Sharon, one day after Mass to ask her if anything was wrong. Sharon immediately burst into tears, confessing that her previously bright, cheerful daughter had become a recluse overnight, refusing to leave her room. Again, such things happen, but it aroused the Father Felipe's interest, and he paid the family a visit a few days later. What he witnessed upon entering the girl's room was enough to make him call us immediately. Rather than paraphrase, I'll include a transcription of the voicemail he left here. There was a foul smell. It hit you all the way down the hall, some kind of cocktail of sweat and excrement. It grew more powerful as I approached Maya's room, such that I was hesitant to enter. At the doorway, I hesitated. That's when I heard the awful growling, like an animal's stomach, left empty far too long. Nothing about it sounded the least bit human. I said a prayer and entered. The girl, I almost hesitate to call her that now, had been beautiful when I last saw her, so much so that she'd been the subject of several confessions from teenage boys in the parish, all unable to take their eyes off of her. Adult men too. Her mother had been pushing her toward a career in modeling. Television, something I warned them both about. Pride, the dangers of the superficial. Of course, I'm a priest in LA. I have many such conversations. I will say that Maya's mother was particularly obsessed with her daughter's career in a way that gave me pause. But I felt that if I confronted her too harshly about the subject, I might push her away from the faith entirely. When I walked into the room, I had to suppress my urge to vomit. Maya lay in a bed in the center of the dark bedroom. Something, its texture uneven and smudged with fingerprints, had been rubbed and dried over the windows, blocking out the light. Despite the near dark, I could just make out Maya's skeletal form, her skin clinging like tissue to her bones, exposing every crease. The growling sound was emanating from her stomach and up her throat, the low pitch more like the death row of some great beast than a teenage girl. There was a scratching sound filling the room too, and when I looked closer, I realized that she was weakly moving her arm, grabbing handfuls of dry rice from a 50-pound bag by her side. She moved her hand to her lips, eating the dry rice whole before going back for another handful. Looking around by her bedside, I saw at least 6 or 7 similar bags littered on the floor, Like what you see? She asked me. Of course not. I'm not exactly your type, am I? Couldn't get hard for a girl like me if you tried. Maybe worth a shot, though. Why don't you come a little closer? Give me a little kiss? I knew, in that moment, that I was in mortal danger. Behind me, the door began to close on its own accord, and as I reached back to stop it, it slammed shut. I heard the crunch of bone as my fingers smashed in the doorframe. The break was bad enough that I could see the white of my bone through the skin, and I was bleeding profusely. Suddenly, the girl was up. Without a sound, she'd moved to the foot of the bed, her legs no thicker than pool cues dangling over the side. "You smell amazing, Father," she said. She stood, and her posture was bent, unnatural. One of her knees seemed to bend the opposite way. One of her arms seemed to have broken in so many places that it flapped like a tentacle. With my good hand, I pulled the door open as hard as I could, trying to free my limp fingers and escape before she could reach me. She stepped deliberately. I sensed that she could move faster if she desired, but she enjoyed watching me squirm, almost without thinking. I began to recite a Hail Mary in the original Latin, something that has always brought me peace. As the words exited my mouth, I could tell that Maya was bothered, even taking a small step back. "Shut up," she was muttering. "Shut up about that bitch." But I refused to stop, and as I did, I was able to pry the door open, a little at a time. Then, all at once, Maya was screaming, commanding me to close my mouth. Suddenly, the door flew open, and I stumbled through, shutting it behind me as fast as I could. After that, there was only silence. No one has heard a thing from inside the room since then. I have instructed Maya's mother to avoid going inside at all costs. We need help, desperately. A strange look had crossed Father Anthony's face after he heard the message. He went to consult a few old books in his personal library as I listened to the message on repeat, trying to sift through the details. "How bad is it?" I asked when he returned. "It is what it is," he said. "The protocols are clear. We go. We evaluate. Should it turn out to be a major exorcism, we will use the prayer to Saint Michael for as long as it takes. Pack your large suitcase. It may be a while." "Father," I asked, "has the prayer ever failed to remove the entity?" He shook his head. "Demons are cowards by nature. With some luck, within a few weeks it will flee, just as its brethren have before." Father Anthony and I were different in our faith. Mine was almost like romance, swelling one day and waning the next, ever present but varying vastly depending on my mood. His was steady. To Father Anthony, the universe was perfectly ordered, bound by immutable laws. To him, the prayers always worked, just as one pool ball colliding with another would predictably transfer its force. So too would his prayers send demons reeling. "You look worried," he said, as I played the message again. "Don't. It's unseemly for a man of the cloth. Pack your bag. By now, you should know that time is critical." Though he was almost steady as always, I noticed a slight tick as he spoke, like his mouth couldn't stop twitching. Looking down, I saw he was carrying a small pouch of red velvet that I'd never seen before. "Just a precaution," he said. "Hopefully something we don't need until much further into your training." I never expected to become an exorcist. My family wasn't even Catholic growing up. My parents were hippie types, mercurial in their beliefs. For a while, we attended a Baptist church. Then, just as I'd finally learned all of the lyrics to the hymns, we moved 2 towns away, where my mom got swept up in the Kabbalah and tried to drag us all into it with her. Before I was a teenager, I'd spent a day or 2 in a mosque, a Swinomish smokehouse, and a Gnostic temple. It was my wife, Sophia, who brought me into the faith. She had grown up in a big Italian-American family in New York, and for her, Catholicism was the same as family. I converted to marry her. All it took was a few months of classes and a ceremony on Easter. I didn't even ask myself if I believed in God. It was enough to believe in Sophia. She was a true believer in the best sense of the word, generous to a fault, always exhausting herself trying to keep us all happy. All year, she sewed quilts, using them as Christmas presents or baby shower gifts. Several times, she tried to teach me how to sew, but I was hopeless, clumsy. She loved me anyway. Then, one Thanksgiving, after staying up far too late drinking wine and prepping vegetables, she woke up and decided to run to the store for pre-made dinner rolls. It was icy. She wasn't even speeding, but it didn't matter. She skidded into oncoming traffic at the wrong time. She died instantly. After she was gone, none of my usual crutches dulled the pain. Alcohol, throwing myself into work, exercise, it all felt hollow, insufficient to replace Sophia. We held a funeral mass shortly after she died, and it was the first time I felt an ounce of peace. The light streaming in from the stained-glass windows suddenly seemed different to me, as if heaven were actually on the other side if I could just step through them. I found myself going to church more often after that, not just on Sundays, but on weekdays too, right after work. I'd watch the darkening sky through the stained glass as I knelt in one of the back pews, and for a short time, I felt like Sophia wasn't so far away. Eventually, the priest there, Father Ignatius, would gently tell me that it was well past closing time, and I would leave, until one day, he asked me to come with him. "I wonder if you'd consider joining the priesthood," he said. "Some widowers do." I laughed. "I'm barely Catholic," I said. "I just joined for her." He shook his head. "I don't believe you." The house at 1237 Palmer Avenue was decadent, even by LA standards, set back on a nearly full-acre lot bordered by a tall stucco wall. The house soured up 3 stories, all elegant metal and glass. Later, we would learn that the girl's father had paid well over $1 million for the architect alone before construction ever started. As we approached, we noted that one bedroom where the light shone brown-red though a darkened window. Reflexively, we both made the sign of the cross. Sitting on the front steps, we met Father Felipe, who was half asleep, slumped against the rail. Though he couldn't have been much older than 30, his skin appeared sallow, his eyes ringed like a cold, distant planet. His hand was wrapped in a thick bandage crusted with blood. "Father Anthony, Father Matthew," he reached out, his hands shaking, before breaking down in sobs. I could tell Father Anthony was unsettled at this greeting. "You have done your part now, Father Felipe," he said. "You should go back to your church, pray, rest." Father Felipe shook his head. "I won't leave until we've seen this through," he said. "I made a promise to myself." Father Anthony shook his head. "That's merely pride whispering in your ear," he said. "Please, go." Father Felipe reached down into his pocket and found a piece of candy. He popped it into his mouth. His breath was rank, and I wondered how long it had been since he last brushed his teeth. "I'll just wait a little longer," he said, "just until you've had a chance to go in." I could tell Father Anthony wasn't happy about this, but he was eager to go in and get to work. We brushed past Father Felipe, who fell back into a ball on the steps, and we walked to the door. Father Anthony rang the doorbell once, then waited patiently. After perhaps 15 seconds, he scowled and rang it again. "Mrs. Knowles," he called, but there was no response. Then, finally, he turned the knob and we entered. Immediately, the stench hit us both. The house smelled as if the walls around us would burst, sending a flood of excrement down to cover our feet. Father Anthony raised a handkerchief to his nose, passing another to me so that I could do the same. Again, he called for Mrs. Knowles, but there was no response. Somewhere, up above, we heard a skittering sound, knocks on the wood, like someone on stilts running through the hall. Father Anthony fumbled in his pocket, removing his silver cross. He began to wave it ever so slightly back and forth, like a hypnotist's pendulum, as he recited a Hail Mary. "Mrs. Knowles," I shouted, and the thumping sound stopped. "She's in the kitchen," said a voice that made my heart nearly stop. It was deep and resonant and seemed to speak from all around us. Father Anthony gestured for me to go to the kitchen. "You find the mother. I'll go up to talk to the girl," he said. He had removed the red velvet bag from his pocket and was loosening its drawstring. "Maybe we should call for assistance," I said, but he shook his head. If we follow the rites, we will prevail. Remember, God is on our side. Go find the mother and get her out of the house. Hurry." Without another word, he headed up the stairs. I walked down the hall toward the kitchen, almost running. Then, as I reached the archway separating the rooms, I stopped and vomited, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. There in the kitchen lay Mrs. Knowles, or rather, what was left of her. In the center of the room lay a pile of bloody, broken bones, all stacked in a messy pile, and topped with a broken skull, matted in blonde hair. Most of her, the flesh, the organs, the brain and muscle, the fat was all gone. Time may have passed. I can't be sure. My vision seemed to go black and then red. Strangely, I found myself oddly hungry, so much so that I nearly opened the refrigerator to look for something to eat. Then I heard a scream from upstairs, and my senses came back to me. I ran through the hall and up the staircase, 2 steps at a time. It was clearly Father Anthony screaming, his cries mixed with the prayer to St. Michael. "Thy thousand hosts are spread, embattled o'er the azure sky. But Michael bears thy standard dread, and lifts the might cross on high." The prayer was punctuated with repeated shrieks, both from him and someone else. I ran down the hallway toward Maya's room, the rank smell growing so thick it seemed to thicken the very air. In the room, I found them. They were coiled together, like 2 pythons, both trying to strangle the other. Blood was everywhere, flowing freely from wounds on both of their bodies. Somehow, in the few minutes since we'd parted ways, Anthony had managed to lose both legs and his left arm, all bitten down to the nubs. Another long gash had opened his belly, and his guts were hanging out of him. With his one good arm, he was holding something gleaming up to Maya's face, through the hazy air and the blood. It took me a few seconds to recognize it as a needle and silver thread. Somehow, he had managed to apply 3 or 4 stitches across the girl's mouth, sealing it almost shut. Now, even as he tried to apply a 4th stitch, she bit at his fingers with the side of her mouth, severing the pinky and chewing it with obvious joy. Father Michael cried out but continued the prayer. He, in that sign, the rebel powers, did, with their dragon prince, expel, and hurled them from the heavens' high towers, down, like a thunderbolt, to hell. Every part of me wanted to run. If I'm being honest, I wanted to tear my collar and robes from my body and sprint into the LA night, never looking back. But something in me refused. Instead, I sprang forward, taking the shaking needle from Father Anthony's shaking fingers. "I did everything right," he said weakly, and then the light in his eyes went out. Maya turned her attention to me now, trying to bite me, shouting curses. "Run, run, run, little assistant, you're in over your head." I stared at the silver thread dangling from her mouth. I'd never even heard of such a thing. There were rules, protocols that I'd never even heard of, that I wasn't ready for. The girl smiled, pulling at the thread, beginning to unravel Father Anthony's careful work. I saw now that she would open her mouth wide and eat me down to the very bone, that I would scream while she chewed up my lungs and heart. Indeed, she was reaching for Anthony's guts now, slurping his intestines through the small hole still left on the side of her mouth. Except that I wasn't seeing any of that now. I was in a quiet room with Sophia, sitting side by side. On ours laps was a quilt. She was smiling, the light catching the strands of her light brown hair. "I can't do it," I was saying, fumbling with the needle. "Of course you can," she said. "It's not science. It's just in and out, in and out. We know you're good at that." I blushed, the needle slipping out from between my fingers. "Just relax," she said. "Here, let me guide you." She put her hand on mine, her flesh warm and soft. Slowly, she guided my fingers down through the soft white fabric. Then suddenly, I was back. I watched my fingers slip the silver thread through Maya's lips. Only a crack at the side of her mouth remained exposed. "You're different than them," she said, her words more muffled now, and it almost sounded like a normal girl's voice. "You carry someone with you." "Who?" I used the moment of surprise to apply the final stitch, blood pooling around the thread as I cinched it shut, silencing her forever. As soon as it was done, she fell back in the bed, her eyes closing as sleep took her. After a while, after I'd gotten my thoughts together, I called Father Anthony's superior at the Vatican to explain what had happened. I tried to stay calm, to explain things as accurately as possible, but I'm sure my voice was shaking. Around me, the worst of the stench was gone, though ordinary one's blood. Bile persisted. Still, the air was that much cleaner than before, and I found I was able to breathe. I expected him to doubt my story, but he just listened without saying anything. Then, finally, as I reached the end of what I had to say, he spoke. "You were able to apply the stitches yourself?" "Just the last couple. Father Anthony did most of the work." He paused for a moment. "Did you have any other outside help?" I thought about that for a second. About Sophia. "Maybe." "You did well," he said. "We will send people, for both you and the girl. They will bring you back here." "To the Vatican? Is that the protocol?" There was a brief pause. Father Anthony was a firm believer in protocol. "Are you?" "No," I said after a moment. "Good," he said. "Then we will have much to discuss when you arrive." For an hour, maybe two after I called the Vatican, I sat on the front steps of the house, staring into space. Father Felipe was nowhere to be seen. I figured that was for the best. He'd probably taken Father Anthony's advice and run back to his church. With any luck, he was sleeping. I sat shaking on the steps. I reeked of blood and worse. Of course, I thought through the horror I'd just witnessed. The thick air, the smell of exposed guts, the glee on Maya's face as she slurped up Father Anthony's intestines. But that wasn't what dominated my thoughts. I'd seen her, Sophia, just as clearly as if she were still alive, warm and sitting beside me, teaching me to sew. Without question, she had been there. She had saved me. And so, I must have made an odd sight when the priests sent by the Vatican arrived. I sat there covered in several people's blood, including my own, my fingers bleeding from my clumsy needlework, smiling like I'd just seen God himself. "So good to find you well, Father Matthew," said a tall, muscular priest with a thick, grey beard. "I'm Father Thomas. This is my trainee, Father Anselmo." He gestured to a rail-thin, bald man with angular features beside him. "I thought I knew all of the exorcists working in the States," I said, still half-dazed. He shook his head. "We are not ordinary exorcists," he explained. "We belong to a particular order, where discretion is of utmost importance. Still, we know rumors of our existence circulate. Perhaps you've heard of the Knights of St. Michael." I shook my head. "Good," he said. "We are only called upon in cases requiring certain non-traditional skills. Based on your call, the Vatican believes this may be one such case." Father Anselmo shot him a look, and I recognized it immediately. It was one I'd given Father Anthony a dozen times when we arrived at the home of some poor girl claiming to be possessed, but really just needed a few years of therapy. Maybe some antipsychotic meds. "What?" I asked. "You don't believe me? What I saw?" "We're certain you saw something," said Father Thomas. "Whether you performed a common exorcism or encountered something greater remains in question." "Look at my fucking clothes," I shouted, staggering to my feet. "Look at the blood on my hands. Smell me. Don't you smell it?" That's when I looked down at myself and realized I was clean. Not even a drop of blood decorated my robes. The only evidence of my encounter was a small scab on my index finger from where I'd pricked myself with the needle as I sewed Maya's mouth shut. I looked back at the house. Even the dark smeared window was clean now, with a gentle light shining out. Without another word, I ran back up the steps and opened the door. Inside, the house was pristine, almost unnaturally so. The blood was gone. The stink too, somewhere. A vanilla candle was burning. Gentle music played on the speakers overhead. "The girl," I said to no one in particular, and now I was running up the stairs two at a time again. I ran down the hall and burst into her room. half expecting to find her hanging from the ceiling by her feet, a mass of skin and sinew hanging from her mouth. Instead, I found her lying still, almost death-like in bed. She wore a spotless white dress, and her hair fell about her head on the pillow as if perfectly arranged, strand by strand. She was beautiful now, no longer the creature of paper and bones I'd encountered hours earlier. The only evidence that anything had happened was the silver thread still in place, sealing her mouth shut. I heard the other priests approaching from behind me. "None of this is right," I said. "None of it was this way." "I believe you," said Father Thomas, putting a hand on my shoulder. "We have seen stranger things. The devil can be exceptionally tidy when he chooses to be." Or could it be that Father Matthew elected to perform a wholly unnecessary surgery, said Father Anselmo, gesturing to the girl's lips. "We can pray that such is the case, for her sake," said Father Thomas. "In the meantime, we will proceed as if this is a true lieutenant of hell, likely of the third circle." I gave him a look. There were no such things as circles of hell in the canon. "Gluttony?" asked Father Anselmo, incredulous. "I thought they were supposed to be fat." Father Thomas shook his head. "Remember your Aquinas," he said. "Gluttony takes 5 forms: lauta, too luxurious; studiose, too elaborate; nemis, too large a quantity; prepropere, eating at the wrong time; ardenter, eating too fast. A glutton may be any size." I could tell Father Anselmo wanted to argue, but he was the trainee after all, and it wasn't becoming to argue, especially in front of a stranger. He bit his tongue. "Very well then," said Father Thomas. "Then we shall proceed. Prepare bindings of cloth soaked in holy water. Wrap her once at the shoulders, once at the wrists, once at the ankles. Father Matthew, if you are feeling up to the task, another set of hands would be useful, especially since time can be a factor in some cases. We will want to get her back to the Vatican as soon as possible. Before." As he spoke, I saw a hint of movement coming from the girl's direction. Glancing over, I saw something thick and black peek its head from between the 2 middle stitches of the mouth, where the gap was greatest. It could have been a worm, a tongue, a snake, a centipede. Before I could get a good look, it pulled back inside. I helped Father Anselmo prepare the bindings, though I could tell he would have rather done the job himself. They'd brought holy water in some kind of red-brown earthenware jar that I hadn't seen before. We soaked 3 long strips of cloth and bound the girl, who didn't stir once. Though I had never heard of such a protocol before, the process made sense. 3 bindings representing the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit uniting to bind the demon. 2 hours later, we were on a private plane bound for Rome. The aircraft was luxurious by any standard, with plush white leather chairs emblazoned with the flaming sword of Saint Michael in delicate black embroidery. 2 pilots sat up front, through a security door that looked extra thick. They'd made a point of letting me know they were both well armed. Of course, I wondered why such levels of protection were necessary, but I just nodded as if this was all perfectly normal. "Enjoying the accommodations?" asked Father Anselmo. Father Thomas had drifted off at takeoff, snoring loudly. Maya lay nearby in a seat they'd reclined to dorm a bed. "Father Anthony and I flew coach if we flew at all," I said. "Usually we drove." He scoffed.
I suppose you think you're superior because of your humility?
"I never said any such thing," I said. But he was right. "You didn't need to," he said with a sneer. He cracked his knuckles, and then scratched furiously at the back of his head. "You only reveal your own ignorance. We, the Knights of Saint Michael, are the very sword of God. One does not enter the battlefield on bended knee, supplicating to his opponent. He comes out in armor of gold, wielding a sword of fire, striking fear into the hearts of the demons." Now it was my turn to laugh. "So the leather seats, that's the modern-day equivalent of a flaming sword. I'm sure they terrify the devil." Father Anselmo stood and stretched. He itched at his scalp again, furiously. "I read about you on the way over," he said. "A convert, widowed. You wear the robes. But you're different than those of us who grew up in the faith, who never knew a woman's touch. Before, I'd been slightly annoyed at Father Anselmo. Now, at the mention of my wife, I felt my blood rising. God comes to us all at different times, I said, quietly, but my hands were balled into fists. Save it for the flock, he said. We're all priests here. We should speak honestly. You and I, we're not the same. When my wife was in high school, she had a terrible boyfriend. He was an honor student and a top athlete. Popular, beloved. No one would have suspected the pain he inflicted on her in private. Even when we started dating, 10 years later, she couldn't describe what he'd done to her physically. In the dark of night one summer alone in his family's cabin, no one for miles around, a fact he whispered to her over and over. All she would say is that a few days later, after praying the pain would go away on its own, that she'd driven herself to the doctor, who gave her stitches and promised not to tell her parents. Somehow, even after what he'd done, she couldn't break up with him. They continued dating through prom, even into the summer after senior year. She tried not to be alone with him, but it was futile. He hurt her again and again. When they finally broke up, there was no big confrontation. It was just the standard ending where they both went to college and drifted apart. Eventually realizing they were no longer a couple, when they saw each other on holiday breaks, they acted friendly, even though his presence was enough to send her into a panic. After hearing the story, it occurred to me that I might have a moral obligation to find this man and hurt him as badly as he'd hurt her. Maybe to kill him, partly to spare any future women he might date from a similar fate. But if I'm being honest, it was mostly pure revenge. Naturally, Sophia was utterly opposed. Maybe she wanted to protect me from the consequences of such a thing. More likely, she knew I wouldn't have a chance against him. He'd been an all-state wrestler and outweighed me by 20 pounds. Eventually, we came to a kind of agreement. I wouldn't seek the man out, but if I ever happened to bump into him, I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. For many years, whenever we visited her hometown, I felt a surge of adrenaline any time a man matching his description walked in the door of a restaurant. Is that him? I'd ask, and she'd shake her head no. Gradually, we visited Sophia's hometown less often. I never did see the man in person. As far as I know, I'd still have her permission to kill him if I ever bumped into him. You're right, I told Anselmo after a moment. We're not the same, and since we're going to be honest, maybe you'd be a better priest if you'd had a couple of rolls in the hay before you put on your collar, even just to know us sinners a little better. He was scratching harder than ever at the back of his head now. We're not the same, he was shouting now, so loud that Father Thomas began to stir in his seat. You didn't deserve to capture a lieutenant of hell. You got lucky. You weren't even properly trained. You just finished one last stitch. You're not even a real priest. He practically roared the last word. It had a strange echo, like it had been harmonized by two voices at once. As he spoke, he tore at the back of his skull again, and this time I heard a ripping sound, like flesh unzipping in two. Blood began to accumulate on his shoulders. Father Anselmo, said Father Thomas quietly, fully awake now. Please step to the side of the plane. Kneel. Fold your hands in prayer. I'll do no such thing. You meat-headed fuck, shouted Anselmo. It was clear that two voices were speaking in unison now, his and another deeper one emanating from the back of his skull. Suddenly, without warning, two things happened.
Father Thomas began to say a Hail Mary in the original litany,
so fast that the words flowed together in a steady hum. Second, he pelted Father Anselmo with a jar of holy water that exploded as it collided with his chest, sending fragments of pottery and liquid everywhere. Behind me, he shouted between recitations. I stepped back. As I did, the plane shook, and I nearly fell. The sky had been cloudless when we took off from LA. Now, dark thunderheads had gathered outside, blotting out the sun and pelting the small windows with rain. Father Anselmo had taken a step back after absorbing the force of the water jar. He also turned 180 degrees, revealing his back to us. There, I saw a bloody face no bigger than a baby's skull protruding just above where his neck met his hairline. The baby's contorted mouth shouted every syllable as Father Anselmo screamed. "There's nowhere to run to. Priest, you're trapped up here with me now. This time, you're mine." "Bifrons the Two-Faced," said Father Thomas. "I thought I recognized you." Before he could say another word, Father Anselmo Bifrons now charged at him. I realized that in addition to the tiny head, he'd sprouted an extra set of arms and legs, which extended from his elbows and knees and had now grown almost as large as the original ones. The fresh limbs were bare and bloody, glossed with a sheen of mucus like a newborn baby. Bifrons fell on Father Thomas with his full weight, beating at him with the bloody limbs and biting at his face with his fast-growing new head. But Father Thomas had been prepared. Pushing Anselmo to the side with one hand, he took a small silver blade in the other and stabbed it to the hilt into the baby head's right eye. The baby screamed a low growl that seemed to shake the very air inside the plane, and the aircraft dipped again, this time by 100 feet or more, tossing us all off our feet. When I looked back at Father Thomas, his forehead was bleeding from falling against the edge of a chair. Ignoring the injury, he dug into his bag and removed 3 more knives. "Demon of greed," he said, gesturing to the demon. "Bifrons, we can contain him if we seal all 4 eyes. Try to stay back. Let me work." Even as he said it, though, I could see him wobbling on his feet. He touched his forehead, and the blood was gushing now. "Bad luck, Father Thomas," said Bifrons. "I suspect our next little conversation will be in my place." He charged at Father Thomas again, but the priest was ready. Deftly, he stabbed 2 knives into the eyes that had once been Anselmo's. The demon howled in pain, so loud that my ears began to ring, and I fell to my knees. Outside, the clouds had fully blotted out the sun. Everything seemed to be shaking. I wondered if we were falling into the deep, black sea. Thomas fell back now, his head thwopping the ground with an unpleasant crack. He didn't open his eyes. Across the plain, the demon rose, fixing me in its one remaining eye. The lights shorted in the plain, and the engines went silent. Everything was black, save for the occasional flash of lightning. It seemed to me that I was about to die, or that perhaps I already had. Perhaps the rest of my existence would be like this, surrounded by darkness with the constant feeling of falling. A demon laughing a few feet away. Of course, fear gnawed at me, like a family of mice nibbling at my guts. But could I be blamed? Wouldn't anyone be afraid in such a moment? "Bad luck for you both," said the thing. "At least you'll finally be able to visit your dear wife again. Sophia, isn't it? I hear she's been missing you greatly." At the mention of Sophia's name, reality snapped back to focus. It was as if the plane was holding in mid-air. Gravity felt somehow lighter. I got to my feet, my fear replaced with simple, blind rage. Suddenly, the thing in front of me wasn't Bifron, it was Sophia's ex. I reached forward and uncurled the final blade from Father Thomas's limp, bloody fingers. "I told you not to talk about my wife," I said. I could feel her there with me again. Silently, I asked if our deal was still on, if I could still kill him. I can't be sure, but I think I heard her whisper, "Yes." Now it was my turn to charge forward. My vision narrowed. Through the darkness, all I saw was the one cruel, white eye staring at me. I thought of my wife. Then I drove the blade home. On the tarmac in Rome, a man with red robes was waiting for us. I recognized him from a pamphlet I'd once read as Cardinal Robles. He reacted little as he surveyed the bloody scene. The pilot still hadn't left the cockpit. I suspected it was some sort of protocol. Father Thomas lay in my lap, his head bound with a pillowcase I'd fashioned into a makeshift bandage. Both Maya and Anselmo's bodies lay peacefully on the floor, her mouth sealed with thread, his eyes with daggers. After a moment, the Cardinal began to laugh. "You'll have to forgive me, Father Matthew," he said. "It's not often that I send my men out to capture one demon, and they come back with 2. I coughed up a bit of blood. I wondered when I'd been injured. I didn't feel like laughing. "Enough," he said. "I think we'd better get these 2 back home before a 3rd one shows up." "What do you say?" I nodded weakly. "We'll get these 2 to their new accommodations, and then we're going to have a nice long chat," said the Cardinal. I'm starting to think that Saint Michael has big plans for you. I squirmed uncomfortably in the ancient stool, its uneven padding forcing me to sit at a slant. In retrospect, I'm sure Cardinal Robles chose it on purpose. He wanted to see me as uncomfortable as possible, all part of the test. Of course, I was nervous already. As intended, the Grand Chapel's ceiling soaring above us made me feel small. 66 feet above us, God reached out to Adam, granting him life. The metaphor was obvious. I was Adam, waiting for my prize. But what was the Cardinal about to give me? The old man fixed me in his gaze. "What do you know about hell?" he asked after a few moments. I thought back to my training. "Hell is the absence of God," I answered carefully. He smirked. "Good. Cautious answer. We like caution here. Sometimes. Other times, we prefer cojones." He started laughing, as if he'd just made some kind of outrageous joke. The Cardinal had grown up on the streets of Montevideo in Uruguay. He had a reputation for crude jokes. Some people called him direct. Others called him an asshole. I suppose he was both. "Let me rephrase," he said. "Suppose I were to ask you the geography of hell. Could you draw me a map? Could you describe its mountains, its swamps?" I shook my head. "I have never thought of it as a physical place," I answered, still careful. "Of course not," he said, "but you're not so stupid as to deny the connection between the physical and spiritual." "Correct. Take your little altercation in Los Angeles. You sewed the girl's lips shut." "Correct. But if that's all you did, there would have been no effect. You were able to quell the demon's hunger because the sewing of the mouth had a metaphorical, spiritual equivalent. Same with the demon's eyes on the plain. Think of Matthew 18:9. "And if thine eye causeth thee to stumble, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. It is good for thee to enter into life with one eye, rather than having two eyes to be cast into the hell of fire." "Now I'm a bit lost," I confessed.
The Cardinal rubbed at his temples,
Clearly disappointed. "Let's try this one more time. Stop being so goddamn careful, or I'm sending you back to the States to study under Father David." I shuddered at the thought. Father David was a notorious coward, a priest only fit to deal with minor exorcisms. He had called the Vatican for assistance so many times on major ones that he'd earned the name Father Backup amongst his peers. "Those things you sealed, where do you think they live?" "Think back to Maya Knowles's house." I closed my eyes and thought back to the house where I'd sewn Maya Knowles's lips shut. I had spent every hour since then trying to block out the smell of blood and colon, the thickness of the air. Suddenly, I found I was speaking, almost without trying. "A swamp," I said. "Thick mud, shit raining from the sky." The Cardinal's eyes lit up. "Yes, yes, more. Someone are always screaming. Animal sounds. The air is freezing. There's a constant hail pelting the burning mud." "Yes," he shouted, and then he began to recite. "In the third circle I arrive, of showers. Ceaseless, accursed, heavy, and cold, unchanged. Forever, both in kind and in degree. Large hail, discolored water, sleety floor. Through the dun midnight air streamed down amain. Stank all the land whereon that tempest fell." I struggled to remember where he was quoting from. Certainly not the Bible this time. "Inferno," he said after a moment, looking disappointed. "You're not a literary man." "I studied engineering in college," I said, more of a math brain. "I do remember something about Dante being non-canonical." He rubbed his temples again. There was something exaggerated about his movements, like Donald Duck losing his cool in an old cartoon. "There are truths in this world that are better kept secret," he said. "The church must act as a shield sometimes, you know, guarding the flock from the fiery darts of the wicked. And so it is with us exorcists." I looked up at him, slightly confused. "I wasn't aware that you were an exorcist yourself. I mean, you're a cardinal." He started laughing. "There's a lot you don't know." He stood, stretching slightly. Then he began to lift the hem of his robe. I looked down to see a deep scar running from his ankle to his knee. "Got that one from a demon of violence named Taru. Everyone was sure I'd lose the leg below the knee. Doctors are idiots, of course. He raised the robe further and turned from me, exposing 4 parallel scars across his back. Those are from Mammon himself, demon of greed. He got away from me, but not before he left me this little souvenir. He paused, looking up at the ceiling, up at God. They're demons. You understand? They're different than the minor entities responsible for most possessions. Even what the church calls a major exorcism is really just the minor leagues compared to what we handle. These demons I'm talking about, they are the lords and lieutenants of hell, professional soldiers for the other side. More exorcists will never encounter one over the course of a whole career. The thing that was inside Maya Knowles, I started to say, was Lady of Hell, a demon of gluttony, quite powerful. Really, you shouldn't be here today. If things had gone according to the demon's plan, she would have eaten you too, and then consumed her own host body like an Ouroboros, breaking her own arms and legs and swallowing them whole. I was beginning to feel sick, and if I'm going to be honest, I was afraid. Everything I'd known about demons up to that point was suddenly invalid. I thought I'd been a soldier for the church, but now I realized I was playing parlor games with hell's second stringers. Were the things that had taken Maya and Anselmo the worst things out there, or were there even worse horrors to be discovered? Why are you telling me all this? He smacked his head and muttered, Dios mío. Then he looked up at me. Isn't it obvious? He finally asked. I want to know if you want in, if you want to play in the major leagues. Mijo, do you want to fight some real demons with us? Or do you want to go back to sprinkling holy water on little shits pretending to be possessed so that they can get more attention from Mama? I thought of the demon slurping Father Anthony's guys through the tiny hole at the side of its mouth. I thought of the baby head sprouting from Father Anselmo's neck. Its deep, guttural laugh. I thought of the foul air, the smell of shit. Cardinal Robles held up a hand. Don't answer yet, he said. It's enough to know you're considering it. Before your answer, you need to see the reality of what we're up against. He swept his arm out with a flourish. Follow me. Do you believe in God? Any kind of God? I looked up at Sophia. It was a bold question for a second date, but she was asking it anyway, even before I'd asked her out. I'd known Sophia was religious. Not that she was a fanatic or anything, but she went to church most Sundays, which was unusual in our social group. I shrugged, hoping we could deal with the question quickly and move on to another topic. I think at some point, I decided it was one of those big questions that you could never answer, so I stopped asking. I try to spend my time on problems that have solutions. She silently ate a few forkfuls of her salad. I'm assuming you do, I said, trying to break the awkward silence. Believe? Well, I don't believe in God, she said after a bit. Believe implies there'd be a possibility of doubt. I know there's a God, because I know there are demons. I've seen them at work. I topped off my wine and took a drink. This was getting interesting. What do you mean, seen them? This is going to sound crazy, so I'll understand if you get up from the table after a bit and walk out on me. I won't be offended at all. We can still be friends after. I met her eyes. They were deadly serious. I'm not going to do that, I said. You can tell me. Now it was her turn to take a long drink. When I was younger, 4th grade, I was possessed for a few months, she said. I almost spit out my wine. I know how it sounds. She continued. I used to be embarrassed to tell people, but it's part of who I am. There was a demon living inside me. It pushed me to a dark little bubble that I didn't know existed. It was terrifying, watching her through a black haze, saying the most vile things to my parents, my sister. I'd always been a good kid. At least, that's what I thought. But I must have let her in somehow. She was crying now. For a second, I wondered if I was on a date with an insane person. But when I looked at her, she didn't seem even the least bit crazy. I reached out and took her hand. I'm so sorry, I said. It's okay, she said. The church, they sent people, exorcists. It turned out to be something minor, they said. It didn't feel minor to me, but their prayers made it go away. I'm sorry, I said again. What else could I say? Don't be, she said. It was a gift. After that, I didn't have to believe anymore. I knew there was something out there, a bad thing and a good thing. I've gotten to carry that with me every day of my life. I followed Cardinal Robles through a series of rooms and doors, each less grand than the last. Gone were the frescoes and magnificent tapestries. Instead, we weaved through corridors of simple brick. I realized that the architecture too was growing simpler, older. The brickwork was uneven, caked with centuries of grime. The air began to grow cold. Without realizing it, I recognized that we'd been walking slowly downward. There were no windows here or even electric light, just large candles inset into the walls. Of course, everyone knows about the grandeur of the current apostolic palace, but like many things in life, truths lurk beneath the surface that most people never realize. Some of these bricks you're seeing now go all the way back to the 4th century. This was all part of the old Saint Peter's Basilica, constructed by Constantine I. He was a convert like you know. The path we followed was winding and haphazard. Without the cardinal there, I wondered if I'd be able to retrace my steps and escape. Escape. That word started to echo in my mind. I realized I didn't like it here. I hated it, wanted to get out at any cost. Back to the light, the murals, God and Adam. Then, something shifted in me. Somewhere, not too far away, I felt her presence. It was unmistakably Sophia, as if she'd just walked behind me in the hall. I turned. Sure, I'd seen her, but she was gone. It was enough to make me keep walking forward. Finally, we came to a door. Beyond this door is no return, said the Carindle after a few moments. Even if you choose not to join us, you will have seen things beyond your imagining, beyond the worst descriptions of Dante or even Revelation. For a moment, I only stared at the door handle. It looked ornate and ancient, filthy from the grime of 1,000 hands of 1,000 priests. Beyond it, I heard something that sounded like the clanking of metal on metal. Go ahead, said the Cardinal. Open it. I took a step back in revulsion, but when I looked again, I saw now a handle, but a woman's hand, soft and welcoming. I knew who it belonged to. Saw the familiar wedding band on the ring finger. I knew, somehow, that if I went forward, I was moving closer to her. I walked forward and opened the door. We entered a room built of ancient stones. It was perhaps as large as a high school gymnasium, but perfectly round, with many doors extending in all directions. To one side sat a man in priest's robes and a thick leather apron. Nearby, a cauldron of molten silver sat over a roaring fire. As I watched, the priest said a blessing over the silver, then poured it into a large, cross-shaped mold. Soon, he was pounding on the surface. Beside him, in neat stacks, lay perhaps 100 such crosses, all neatly stacked. Why so many? I asked the Cardinal, who only smirked. You'll soon see. He gestured to the blacksmith, who set aside his hammer for a moment. Where are the new prisoners? Or just the girl? Actually, asked the Cardinal, and the man gestured silently to one of the doors, adorned with gold inlay and flanked by small, silver gargoyles. The man resumed his work as we walked to the door and opened it. On the other side, I found out what the crosses were for. In the center of a small, dimly lit room lay a cage, more of a box really, a 6-foot cube. The whole thing had been built of silver cross, all elaborately connected to form an inescapable grid. Inside lay Maya Knowles. Her eyes were no longer closed, but the stitching still ran across her lips. Both of her wrists were manacled in braces connected on opposite sides of the cage by silver chains. I gave the Cardinal a curious look. This is like no exorcism I've ever seen, I said. He shook his head. You misunderstand. Father, he said, this is no longer an exorcism. Maya, and whoever has infested her, will be here as our permanent guests, unable to cause further mischief in the world. I felt something twist in my stomach. You have to let her go, I said quietly. I can get the thing out together. The Cardinal shook his head. You could kill her, he said. Release her that way. But there is no saving Maya Knowles' mortal life, which is why she'll be our guest here for as long as she lives. For as long as the demon is trapped within Maya's mortal coil, it will be unable to hurt another soul. You can't, I said. Maya, she's still in there. She's an innocent. Was she truly innocent? The demon would have never infested her, said the Cardinal. Please understand. I know this is a lot to swallow. This is why we work in the basement, out of the light. What we do here takes moral courage. The same bravery that Abraham possessed when he stood over Isaac, dagger in hand, thanks to Maya's sacrifice. Downseans of others, possibly hundreds, will be spared a similar fate. She is the true cage, the box of silver crosses that just keeps her in place. As he spoke, Maya looked up at me, her eyes pleading. It's her, I said. Right now it's her, not the demon. It led her to the surface. She's experiencing all of this. Of course, said the Cardinal. The demon loves to hide inside. It loves to let her suffer. Maya can't eat like that, I said. Can't drink. She won't live long. The Cardinal shook his head. You still don't understand the powers we're facing. With demons of this strength, these lieutenants of hell, the possessed body, is essentially immortal. It has no need for sustenance. Maya will still be here long after you and I are both dust. I wanted to fall to my knees and vomit. The Cardinal was staring at me hard, trying to read my reaction. Do you need a drink? He asked. Water? Wine? I found I could barely speak. He shook his head, looking disappointed. Do what you must, he whispered. I never claimed it was easy to be a soldier on the front lines. I ignored him and took a step toward Maya. Then, suddenly, something compelled me to run to her. I felt around the cage of silver crosses, searching for a hinge that would open or a weak spot in the soldering. Step away, shouted Cardinal Robles. He was keeping his distance from both of us. You still don't know what you're dealing with, and those restraints aren't built to be permanent. Before he'd even finished his sentence, I heard a horrible cracking sound, and I looked over to see Maya's wrenching her arm against one of the braces. The arm had clearly broken, and now blood was gushing freely from the places where her bone had pierced her flesh. Quickly, she pulled the broken limb from the bracer and swung her limp forearm in my direction, spraying me with blood. The blood splattered across my face, running down my lips and into my mouth, and I was struck by the sensation that I'd ingested poison. Drink up, priest. The thing inside her shouted before breaking into peals of laughter. I looked around the room, looking for some kind of weapon. I was filled, suddenly, with a bloodlust like I'd never known. Step back, shouted Cardinal Robles again. This time, he grabbed my collar and pulled hard. He was far stronger than he looked, and I found myself clattering against the ground. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose, frustrated. The demon was laughing now. At me, I realized. This is your new soldier, Robles, it asked. He'll be dead before the week is out. As she spoke, blood continued to pour from her open wound. Seeing my eyes fixed on it, she tried to swing it at me again. But this time I was too far away for the blood to hit me. My stomach turned. If I'm going to be honest, I almost pissed myself. In that moment, I realized I couldn't be in the room another second. My instincts took over. I had to leave. The demon cackled as the fear took over, and I ran. Go if you like, called Cardinal Robles, but you can't run from the devil. I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life, if I'm being honest, not just of the thing in Maya, but of the Cardinal outside the cage, of the whole new reality I'd stumbled into. I ran back to the room with dozens of doors to find the blacksmith back at his work, smoothing out another silver cross. I tried to remember which door I'd come from in the first place, but they all looked basically the same. I walked the circle, fruitlessly searching for some identifying mark, but came up empty. Finally, I just opened one. On the other side was a dark tunnel leading downward. A waft of sulfur hit my nostrils. Blowing on a hot wind, I was immediately struck by the certainty that I'd opened a doorway to hell itself. I was about to close it when I heard a voice calling for me. Matthew, It said, "Is that you? I've been waiting for so long, calling to you, trying to bring you here." I could barely speak. My throat went dry. My vision blurred. Somehow, I still managed to speak her name. Sophia. Matthew. I heard Sophia's voice even more distinctly this time. I was sprinting toward her now as she called my name again and again. The wind in the hallway grew warm, then disappeared, then blew again, even hotter, as if some great beast was breathing in the distance. Finally, the hallway ended, terminating in a large chamber built of ancient bricks, all coated in a sheen of wet, with the rocks themselves sweating. Numerous grates lined the stone floor, the hot air wafting up from them and heating my feet through my shoes. In the center of the room, in a cage of silver crosses tarnished from years of neglect, "Saturday, Sophia." "Matthew," she asked, "is it really you?" She looked beautiful, better than I remembered. She wore a red silk robe that did nothing to hide her form, and I couldn't help watching the way it fell over her body. She certainly looked better than she'd looked on the slab at the morgue the last time I'd seen her. Her face bloodied from slamming against the steering wheel, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I knew what I was seeing was impossible, and yet, for a brief moment, just a second, I wanted it so badly to be true that I let myself believe it was. "Come to me, my love," she said. "There must be some way for you to get me out of here." I found myself looking around for a rock, a crowbar, some forgotten piece of metal I would use to smash her cage to pieces. As I looked, we both heard footsteps, fast approaching down the hall. "Never mind that," she said. "Just come closer, kiss me through the cage. Let me taste your lips just one more time." I hesitated now. There was something different about her skin. It was rippling a bit with a silver sheen. My desire began to mix with fear. I imagined pressing my lips through a hole in the cage only for her to bite them off. I imagined the blood running down my face as she cackled, my flesh dangling from her lips. "Now," she said, and her voice was lower than before. I lifted my right foot from its place on the ground, preparing to step toward her. As I did, she shrugged off the silk dress, revealing her naked body. I felt myself harden in a way I hadn't in years, since she'd died, and I'd given myself to God, careful not to touch the silver cage. She moved closer to me, just barely not touching the metal. "Come," she said. I lowered my foot to the ground. "The scar," I said after a moment. "The burn on your shoulder, it's not there anymore." "I'm whole now," she said. "I'm perfect." "You're not her," I said, tears pouring down my face, and as I spoke the words, her skin began to shimmer silver, and I saw her for what she was, a woman wrapped head to toe in roughly made sacks. The bags were made of coarse cloth with silver threaded through, and bound tightly at the neck, wrists and ankles with thicker silver rope. Before I could speak another word, she lunged forward, lurching against the side of the cage. There was a sizzling sound from where she threw her shoulder against the metal, and she screamed in pain, her voice more like a chorus than a single woman's howl. I staggered back and fell on the slick, wet ground. "You see it, then, for what it is?" asked Cardinal Robles, approaching from behind me. I nodded. "She has had many names, but she's known mostly as Abizu," said Cardinal Robles. "You can call me Abby if you like," said the thing in the cage. She had retreated to the center now, away from the lattice of silver crosses. "Since we're so close and all, we were just about to have a little moment, weren't we, Matty?" "You don't know a thing about me," I said, but she started laughing. Then she held up her hand, which was bound inside the cloth bag. She pulled at it with her opposite hand, revealing the outline of a missing finger. "They didn't get all of me in here," she said. "There was a piece I'd left out in the world. Ask them where I left it. Matty, ask them where it was. How do you think I've been calling to you all this time? How do you think I know you so well?" I looked over at Cardinal Robles, who slowly nodded. "There's much to explain, but not here." He looked agitated, walking over to a small hole in the wall. He shouted down, his voice echoing, Tell someone that the fucking holy water needs a fresh blessing." Then he smiled again and turned back to me. "Natural hot springs," he said, gesturing to the vents. "You bless the water, and voila, keeps them nice and docile. Most of the time. Now, come on, before she tries to dress up like your high school crush and gets you worked up all over again." Slowly, I backed away, following the cardinal out of the room. The whole time, the demon's eyes didn't leave me. Beneath the bag covering her head, I saw her tongue poking out, forming a small wet spot. "See you again soon," she said. "Sooner than you think." And when she said the words, I believed her, and I was terrified, because for the first time, I truly believed a demon had seen my soul and known the weak places in it, because I knew I was imperfect. Abizu called after us as we ascended through the dreary maze. At first it was my name, over and over again. Then it became more of a guttural moan, some sort of cross between pleasure and pain. Even knowing what she was, it took everything in me not to turn back and run to her. "You're trembling, Father Matthew," said Cardinal Robles. "But is it your body or your faith that's shaking?" "I'll be fine," I said, still unable to control the palsy. I was still trying to digest everything the demon had said. "Is it true?" I finally asked. "That she left a piece of herself somewhere? What did she mean?" "Search your heart," he said. About a year into our marriage, I woke to find Sophia missing from bed. I got up and walked down the hall. The house was utterly silent. Then, beneath the silence, I heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound you make when you're doing everything in your power not to cry out. Coming down the stairs, I saw a light on in Sophia's sewing room. I heard the sound again, and I called Sophia's name, but there was no response. Finally, I came to the doorway of the room and looked inside. There Saturday, my wife, a half-finished quilt on her lap. I recognized it as one she'd been working on earlier that day, a blue and white pattern inspired by old Dutch Delftware, except now a deep red had soaked through. "Sophia?" I asked, but she didn't respond. She was doing something with her left hand, picking at it maybe, pressing something. I took a step forward. She inhaled, gritting her teeth, trying not to scream. Then I saw the needle. It was a large one, perhaps 4 or 5 inches long. She had inserted the pointed end into the palm of her hand and was pressing on it now, pushing it deeper and deeper into the skin. As I watched, she pushed with all of her strength, and the needle made a tent of the flesh on the opposite side of her hand before finally piercing through, the blood blooming red around it. She sighed in relief now, tears coming to her eyes. "Sophia," I screamed, running to her, and something seemed to flash on in her eyes. "What are you doing?" "I got 3 stitches wrong," she said quietly. 3 in a row. I had to punish myself. "We need to call a doctor," I said. She was crying now. "There's something wrong inside me," she said. "Something it left behind. It won't come out. It's been there so long. It's all tangled up. It's a part of me now, forever and ever." I was still looking at the needle, trying to decide if I should pull it out or wrap it in cloth before I called 911. "They thought they got it out, but they didn't," she said. "Not all of it." I was nearly hyperventilating as we continued our ascent. The memory of the needle had flooded through my mind all at once. Of course, Sophia had many such episodes. It wasn't exactly that I'd forgotten them, but they were compartmentalized, kept separate from the Sophia I wanted to remember. At the same time, I was well aware that Sophia had been possessed once, and that it had left its scars on her forever after. If I'm being honest, half the reason I joined the clergy was to exact some measure of revenge on the demons that had hurt her. "Wait," I said. "So you're saying that demon, that was the one who—" "Abizu possessed your wife when she was a young girl," said the cardinal. "We sent 2 of our best exorcists. At first, the demon fought to stay in. Then, just before they could perform the ritual of binding, the demon escaped back to hell. Apparently, she left a bit of herself behind inside your wife. He wiggled a pinky in explanation. I thought of the thing in the cage, the missing finger under the cloth bag. After that, Abizu possessed another girl in South Korea. He went on, then a young mother in Australia, a grandmother in Spain. She would use their flesh to fulfill certain desires before discarding the bodies. She moved quickly. In each of those cases, we couldn't catch her fast enough. Our priests arrived to find corpses. Finally, she grew bold and tried to possess a nun in Milan. That time, I went personally and bound her before the demon could escape. Now Abizu remains in the nun's body, caged up as you saw her. She won't hurt another soul. As he spoke the last words, he opened a door and we entered a light-filled room where the air no longer smelled of sweat. For the first time in hours, I felt I could breathe. Now you understand, I hope, the need for what we do, he said. I nodded weakly. The question is, he said, now that you know everything, do you want to join us? I nodded again, but with more confidence this time. I want to catch as many of these bastards as we can, I said. I want to fill this dungeon. I met my girlfriend, let's call her Diana, when I was living in a bustling city. She worked at the same office as I did. We had known each other for like a year or two when we started dating. She would tell me stories about her hometown and the paranormal activities that occurred there. She was one of those people who are deeply interested in the paranormal. I did not believe her stories, because I didn't believe in paranormal stuff. She would always look so full of life whenever she talked about paranormal activities or stories she had heard from other people. After a few months since we started dating, she got a job at her hometown and moved there. I wanted to go there with her, but there were no job openings there. Not for the first few months at least. I applied for a few jobs in her town and finally was able to land one. I could not wait to see her again because I hadn't seen her for months. I remember how Diana and her family welcomed me with open arms when I first entered the town. They fed me delicious food at her home and I formed bonds with her family. In addition to her parents, she had a little sister who was the world to her. Her sister was called Lily. She was a shy, quiet little girl who barely spoke to anyone. Diana had told me how often Lily got sick and how no doctors knew what was wrong with her. Diana would tell me how she and her family thinks that something else was causing Lily to get sick so often. On that day when her family welcomed me, her dad Daniel took me into his room. I wondered what he was trying to do. "Son, I heard that you're going to live in this town," Daniel said, his gaze fixed on me. I nodded in response to his question. "Then there are rules that you must follow." Daniel cleared his throat. "Do not fish at the pier past 12 a.m. in the night. Do not go into the woods past 9 p.m. And finally, do not go anywhere near the beach to the south at sunset. This final rule is one you must never break under any circumstances." I nodded, even though I did not believe him. I believed that everything must have a scientific explanation, and paranormal stuff are made up by people as a way to pass time or for entertainment. After that, I went back to dine with the rest of the family. The rest of the day went normal. Obviously, I couldn't stay at Diana's house, so I ended up renting a place close by to her place. We would go on dates occasionally as I got used to her town. Even though I did not believe her father Daniel had said, I avoided breaking the rules he mentioned out of respect for him. One day, when we were on a date at a local cafe, I brought up what her dad talked about with me. His list of rules. "Yeah," she said. "As long as you are not there at the times my dad mentioned, you're safe." I have to admit, the creepiness of those rules were getting to me. At first, I had thought that this was all a ploy by her dad to get me to break up with her. But seeing as how she herself validated his rules, I was not so sure anymore. As I grew more accustomed to the town, I would go to this beautiful beach to relax. I would use this swing in the woods that led to the beach. I could get a good view of the beach from there. There was always this one kind old lady, let's call her Matilda, who would talk to me whenever she saw me there. She would come there almost every evening to get wood to burn. I enjoyed those days. I enjoyed our conversations. She would tell me stories of the past, about the time when she was young. And at every day, when sunset draws near, she would hurry home after telling me that I should not stick around longer, even though I would have done so without her telling me. And one day, when I was chilling on a bench at the beach at evening, I fell asleep because I had not slept well the previous night. I had a strange nightmare of an old man strangling me when I was on the bench and woke up. No one was there. It was quiet, with the sound of waves splashing. It was dark, with the clouds in the sky shaded with red. I looked at the time. It was already sunset. All of a sudden, I felt a chill run down my spine, like I was not alone. I quickly got back into the woods to go back home. As I was walking in the woods, I saw the old lady, the same one who would always talk to me in the distance. She was standing completely still, with her back turned. I did not notice it until I got close enough to her. She had no feet, and she was hovering above the ground. She turned around to look at me. Her eye sockets were empty, and she was grinning from ear to ear. It was not humanly possible. The minute that happened, I heard sounds of women laughing from all directions. They sounded hysterical. I covered my ears and turned my eyes away from her. And then, when I looked at where she was before, she was gone. I ran as fast as possible. The laughing voices were still there, echoing from all directions. Their volume did not change no matter how far I went. I covered my ears and made my way towards home. The people on the street shot me weird glances, as though they were staring at someone who went insane. As soon as I entered my house, the laughing voices stopped. It was as quiet as it had always been. I went into my room and plucked the courage to look through GHE window. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I looked at the sunset sky and wondered if this was going to continue. At that point, Daniel's warnings replayed in my head. Don't go anywhere near the South Beach at sunset. I wondered if this was the beach that he had talked about with me before. I was worried about what might come next. I stopped going to that beach, but the feeling was always there. I felt like something was watching me no matter where I went. Sometimes I would feel someone touching my shoulder or pull my clothes lightly, and no one would be there when I would turn around to look. I did not tell Diana nor anyone about this. I believed that it was my burden and my burden alone. I did not see the old woman either. For days, ever since this happened, I used my free time to walk around town. I did not pay attention at the time, but I would never see the old woman when I walked around town. Many days passed this way, without further incident. One day, as I was going back home from work, I noticed the old lady standing there in the woods. She gestured me to come closer, but I was too afraid to go to her. She kept gesturing over and over, but I paid no heed to her. As I passed by her, I gave her a glance. She looked normal, like she usually does. I still could not get over how creepy she looked at sunset on the last day I saw her. Seeing how she looked normal, I told myself that whatever I saw and heard the other day must have been my imagination. As soon as I went up to her, she smiled. "Hey, Sonny," she said. "It's been a while since we last saw each other. How have you been doing?" "I have been fine, I guess," I answered. "Sonny, I have a present for you. Can you come with me?" the old lady eagerly asked. "Sure, I guess," I answered with a moment of hesitation. After gesturing me to follow her, she took me to her house in the town. It looked beautiful, as though it was built yesterday. It was filled with lights. Upon entering her house, I noticed that it was completely empty. "Do you live here alone?" I asked, my tone curious. "Yes, I have a few children, but they are all out of town," she answered. She led me into the living room and gestured me to wait. The house was well lit, with a lot of colorful, small lights. It looked as though the house was prepared for a party. Not too long after, she brought me a slice of chocolate cake. "Take a bite, Sonny," she said eagerly. Without wasting any time, I took a bite from the chocolate cake. But the minute I did that, it tasted like mud, and I instantly spat it out. The old lady was still there, observing me eagerly. She started laughing. "Sonny, take another bite," she said. "It tastes terrible," I said to her. She looked disappointed, and then she took the cake slice and went out of the living room. I was puzzled as to why the cake tasted like mud when it was clearly a chocolate cake. I still had the bad taste of it in my mouth. It was enough to make me feel extremely nauseous. I could not stay there any longer, so I went out of the house and rushed towards mine. I was getting weird looks from people on the street again, like I was an insane person. I could not stop to think about it at the time because I was too nauseous. As soon as I got back home, I vomited in my bathroom on the toilet. I did not look at it and flushed the toilet. My whole body felt weak, as though I had a bad fever. I lay down on my bed to rest and fell asleep briefly. I woke up from my phone ringing. It was Diana calling me. I picked up. "Babe, are you okay?" Diana sounded worried. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just feeling a bit nauseous, that's all. I'm feeling better now," I said without thinking. "That's good," she said as though she did not believe me. I sensed that there was something odd. She was unusually silent and did not say anything for a while. "Babe, please tell me the truth," she said, with a serious tone. "What were you doing at the graveyard?" A chill went down my spine. I was genuinely puzzled at her words. "I did not go to any graveyard." "What?" "I didn't go to the graveyard since I came to this town," I said, genuinely confused. "Babe, a lot of people saw you at the graveyard eating dirt," she told me. "You left before anyone could intervene." Hearing this chilled me to my core. Was I losing my mind? Was I actually eating dirt in the graveyard? Or did people mistake me for someone else? Recalling what happened in the past, I came to the conclusion that what my girlfriend was telling the truth. We talked a bit more and she genuinely sounded worried. After that, she hung up the phone. On the next day, as I finished work, Daniel called me and asked me to come as soon as possible. So I went there. I knocked on the front door and Diana opened it. She looked worried. She gestured me to come in, so I went in. She led me into the living room and had me sit down on the couch. She sat right next to me and held my hand tight. A few moments later, Daniel entered the living room and sat down next to Diana. "So, son," he started, "I hear that you did some questionable things in the graveyard." There was silence in the air. I hesitated to talk. "Well," Daniel broke the silence, "because this happened. You must have stayed on the South Beach at sunset." He was right. I nodded. His expression changed to a slightly angry one. "Son," he said, "I told you clearly. Do not stay at the South Beach at sunset." I explained to him what had happened to me there in full detail, as well as everything that happened between me and the old lady. "I see. You've been seeing this old lady almost every evening?" Daniel asked. "Yes," I answered. "What did she say her name was?" Daniel asked. "Matilda," I answered. Daniel's eyes widened. I looked at Diana. She had the same reaction. There was silence for a few moments. "Son," Daniel replied, "Matilda died years ago. She is my mother, and she is Diana's grandmother." It shocked me to my core. I could not believe it. This meant that the old lady I was talking to all along was Diana's grandmother. Questions popped up in my head one after the other. Why did the old lady lie about her children being far away if she was a ghost? Was she evil or something? So that's the shape it took. "Huh," Daniel said, as though he was talking to himself. "What do you mean?" I asked him. "That nasty thing, it's not real. She is not real. That is only one shape among many others that nasty thing takes," Daniel said. "Even my daughter Lily..." Daniel suddenly stopped. "It's okay, Dad," Diana reassured him, holding his hand. "My daughter Lily," Daniel continued, "that thing is tormenting her too. We only realized it recently." I was shocked. So the thing that has been causing Lily to get sick all the time was that thing. Almost right at that time, Lily entered the room. She looked at me and smiled. "Mr. Humpty likes you. Big brother," Lily said to me. "Mr. Humpty wants Big Brother to hang out with him. Come." Before I could answer, Lily was pushed away by an unseen force, and she started struggling against something on the ground. It was as though something invisible was trying to strangle her. Before we could reach her, she stopped. She had passed out. Daniel took her in his arms as he cried. He was whispering something that I couldn't quite make out. After that, he went out of the room. I could see Diana covering her face with her hands, crying. I tried to console her the best I could. When she finally calmed down, I asked her to tell me everything. She told me what happened. They were having a barbecue in the evening, near the woods with their neighbors. Lily was playing with a few girls her age. When they took their eyes off Lily, she disappeared into the woods. They searched for her all over the place, only to find her standing still at the South Beach at sunset. She had been acting like that ever since that event. She would get frequently sick and would not be able to get out of the house. According to Diana, they were a safe distance away from the South Beach. She had no idea about how Lily went to the South Beach through the woods. There was no doubt in my head about it. Lily went through the same thing I did. Diana also told me that people who have been targeted by the entity see it in different forms. For me, it was in her grandmother's form. For Lily, it was someone divided by something else. Diana told me that someone was brutally murdered by some thugs at the South Beach at sunset nearly 40 years ago. I knew what she was getting at. It was his vengeful spirit that was haunting the South Beach. Obviously, it was a lot for me to take in. My entire world has changed within a span of a few days. Above all, I knew that whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with me. Deep in my heart, I wished that thing would leave me alone. As much as I did not want to believe that it was real, I did. I wondered why others were fine, even though they went to the South Beach at sunset. Why Lily? To this day, I'll never know. Diana didn't seem to have an answer either. In the following days, the activity intensified. I would hear distant laughing, talking nearly every time I went outside. Activity started happening everywhere except my home. The other day, my coffee mug was pushed by an unseen force, breaking it to pieces when it hit the floor. Another time, I would see shadow figures moving at humanly impossible speeds, so I reduced the time I spent outside. My contact with Diana was very limited. I could not pick up her calls, even though I knew she was worried. My mind was just too occupied with the activity that was happening to me. The activity at my workplace worsened as I stopped going outside except when I had to work. The shadow figures I would see in my workplace evolved into unnatural entities. One particular day, as I was working past the normal hours, without anyone else but me, I caught something in the corner of my eye. In a cubicle in the same row as mine was a shadow-like face with no features except for its gigantic eye. Only half of its face was visible. I jolted. As if noticing my movement, it put its head back in the cubicle it was in. It was only there for a moment. I did not take my eyes off the cubicle it was in and went up to that cubicle. To my surprise, the cubicle was empty. I was too scared at that point, so I was about to go home. As I reached the exit, I saw a creature, the same creature from before, with its gigantic eyes. This time, its face was visible. It was a distorted face. Its body was like a bodybuilder's. It had 8 legs that on its human-like torso. It looked very much like a spider. Upon seeing it, I heard hysterical women laughing from all directions. At least, that is the thing I remember before fainting. On early morning the next day, I woke up in the graveyard without knowing how I went there. I looked at the visible parts of the street. There was no one around. Figures since it was early morning after all. I quickly hurried towards my house, my body aching with pain. After reaching my house, I decided to call someone, anyone who can help me. I reached for my phone in my pockets, only to realize that it was gone. I was too scared to be outside, so I couldn't afford to go back and search for my phone. So I went inside my house and took a shower. The weight that I had felt the whole time was gone as soon as I entered my room. That was when I noticed the wounds on my body. There were scratches and bruises everywhere. What happened to me last night? I wondered. Still, the image of the spider-like creature lingered in my head. Those gigantic eyes, the distorted face. If possible, I never wanted to see the creature again. After showering, I lay on the bed, thinking. Not too long after, I heard knocks on the door of my room. I opened the door. It was Diana. She looked very worried and sad. She asked me to tell her everything about what has been happening to me. So I did. She called her dad and told him the whole story. She and her dad offered to help me with this situation, and I accepted gratefully. I had heard that Lily went through this similar experience,
And with the help of some exorcists,
it is not as intense anymore. Ever since that, I haven't gotten out of my house much. I am currently taking leave from work, thank God for vacation leave. I've seen a few exorcists, but my condition hasn't improved. Every time I go out of my house, I see that spider-like creature in the shadows, looking at me. Sometimes it disappears. Other times, it runs towards me with inhuman levels of speed and I would faint, only to wake up with scratches all over my body. Oh, and I also figured out that staying in my house keeps it away, so I am spending more and more time in my house. Diana is helping me with food and errands. Thank God I have such a wonderful girlfriend like her. I am too scared to go outside anymore. At the same time, I am wishing to be rid of this curse, ghost, spider, or whatever it is. So I'll remain in my safe haven until exorcists are able to get rid of this entity. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.